Good morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. Coming up on today's programme, we're talking about the DUP's deal with the UK government. We'll get reaction to that with the Housing Minister, who's joining us shortly.
Plus, we're debating two political hot potatoes. Is the House of Lords too full? And what does the military think about all this talk of conscription in the UK?
Plus, we'll be joined by the drag star Crystal, who's just beaten Laurence Fox in a libel case. We'll tell you exactly why.
We certainly will. It's Tuesday, the 30th of January.
Honour your word. Honour your word.
Hardline unionists protest, but after marathon talks, the DUP agrees a deal with the UK government to restore power sharing to Northern Ireland.
I believe that my party has acted decisively based upon the proposals that are before us.
We're live here at Stormont, bringing the very latest on this developing story.
Train pain and cancellations as drivers walk out in a dispute over pay.
A pivotal moment as the US soldiers killed in a drone strike unnamed. Joe Biden weighs up US retaliation, and Lord Cameron heads back to the Middle East. Telepathy is real. We reveal Elon Musk's latest brainchild, giving a human a computer brain implant. Farmers protest around Europe in a battle with governments over their industry's future. Love Yourself will be discussing mental health challenges with Joy Division's Peter Hook. Hello everybody, a very good morning to you. Our top story for you this morning, and the breaking news you're waking up to: the DUP has agreed a deal to return to power sharing in Northern Ireland, subject to legislation to be put forward by the UK government. Power sharing collapsed nearly 2 years ago when the party protested against post-Brexit trade arrangements. Our senior Ireland correspondent David Blevins reports from Belfast.
There were protests outside the meeting.
Honour your word. Honour your word.
And an activist opposed to any compromise was live tweeting from a source inside. But the Democratic Unionist leader emerged from his party executive, having won support for his deal with the UK government.
The package of measures in totality does provide a basis for our party to nominate members to the Northern Ireland Executive, thus seeing the restoration of the locally elected institutions.
It's 2 years since the DUP ended power sharing at Stormont in opposition to the Brexit border in the Irish Sea. But the government has pledged to table legislation to address unionist concerns over Northern Ireland's place in the United Kingdom. That's not enough for hardline unionists who accuse the DUP of selling out and letting the UK government off the hook.
Well, it is the job of the British government to make sure its borders are secure and that the union remains intact. And it's not doing that. So the first thing we must do is get rid of this Tory traitor government.
It's just unbelievable the way things have panned out. But we need good leadership, and we don't have it from the British government or from our own people.
The DUP held the meeting behind closed doors, but a prominent loyalist went viral by posting a running commentary.
The protests outside were predictable, but no one could have anticipated details of this highly confidential meeting being live tweeted from inside, an indication of the divisions within unionism and the challenges faced by Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
He has faced down his critics within and without to restore the power sharing at the heart of the peace process. David Blevins, Sky News in County Down.
Chatting to Amanda about this in just a second. Hello again, Amanda. Before that, though, let's bring in Stephen, who's standing by for us. Hi, Stephen. Momentous day. What happens next?
Momentous day, momentous night. I mean, don't forget all of this, all the action you saw there in David's piece is really only unfolding into the small hours. Jeffrey Donson only informing the media of the developments at around 1 a.m. So this is very much a developing story. What will happen later today is that the parties here in Northern Ireland, the parties entitled to form the new executive here at Stormont, will meet to try and thrash out a few details about how that will go ahead. We know that it will be dependent on legislation being brought forward in London, and I'm sure Amanda can speak to the machinations that we'll see in Westminster over the coming days. But there is optimism here that can happen in a matter of days rather than weeks, although as always timetables in Northern Ireland tend to slip and slide a little bit. So we could see potentially politicians returning here to Stormont to elect a speaker for the Northern Ireland Assembly. Then we will see the First Minister and Deputy First Minister elected, and that will be momentous because for the first time ever, after Sinn Féin became the largest party at the last election in 2022, we will see a nationalist First Minister here in Northern Ireland. That's Michelle O'Neill of Sinn Féin. All of that to come, and the people of Northern Ireland will finally get a devolved government back up and running again.
OK, for now, thank you. So, Amanda, over to you.
Well, indeed. This has been a huge priority for Rishi Sunak ever since he became Prime Minister, really trying to sort out the mess, really, that was left after Boris Johnson's deal in an attempt to kind of get Brexit done, ending up with this deal down the Irish Sea, which was seen as such a betrayal by the unionists. So Rishi Sunak then renegotiated with the EU, had the Windsor framework, thought that was a better option, but it still didn't go far enough. So we've had these months of torturous negotiations. So I think Downing Street will be very pleased to see that we have made this progress. They're not giving a formal statement now until the deal is finalised, but the big final issue is what Tory MPs will make of it all and whether or not that fundamentally changes the relationship with the EU and the EU rules in order to get this deal over the line in Northern Ireland.
Well, let's see. For now, thank you. 7:15, joined by the Housing Minister Lee Rowley to discuss that progress in Stormont. Before that, though, the first train strikes of the year start today and will last until early next week. Looking at the impact of those strikes, today is the worst day. 8 services affected as both ASLEF and RMT unions go on strike over pay. The South and London will be hit the hardest with delays and cancellations to services. South Eastern Gatwick Express and Greater Northern will have no service at all, we're told. There's a reduced service on South Eastern and South Western, including the Island Line, and Thameslink is running a severely reduced shuttle service which will travel between London, St Pancras International, Luton Airport and Luton only. Then, for the rest of the week, here we go, there's more. Wednesday, Northern trains and the Trans-Pennine Express will be impacted. And Friday, we'll see Greater Anglia, the C2C and the LNER impacted. On Saturday, it's West Midlands Trains, Avanti West Coast and East Midlands Railway. And the start of next week will be rocked with either no or limited services from Great Western Cross Country and Chiltern Railways. Amelia is at Waterloo Station. So a lot of cancellations, Amelia.
Well, that was very well summarised, Kay, because it is a long list of strikes that we are set to see. Here at Waterloo, things would normally be a lot busier than they are, but passengers here waiting around, looking up at the boards, trying to work out what is going on. And that is because this is the start of nearly a week's worth of strikes by England's train drivers at national train operators, So this is because drivers at ASLEF, that's the train drivers union, are walking out in an ever-increasing bitter row over pay, and it coincides with a 9-day overtime ban as well, which started yesterday. But what's happening at the moment? People are listening out. You can hear announcements in the background. We've got those boards at the moment. They say special notice, strike action today, limited service operating from this station. And what is happening is that over those different days, different train operators will be, drivers from different train operators will be striking on different days. But look, it's set to be a busy few days and we'll expect lots of delays to come.
OK, for now, thanks very much indeed. Rest of the news now. Gareth is standing by.
I certainly am, to bring you everything. Well, we'll start actually with the Middle East, shall we? Let's turn our attention there, because the US president is weighing up the retaliation to the drone strike by Iranian-backed militants, which killed 3 soldiers at a US base in Jordan. Our US correspondent James Matthews reports.
These are the 3 victims of the Jordan attack. Sergeant William Rivers, Specialist Breonna Moffat and Specialist Kennedy Sanders. They were among US troops training Jordanian forces. Early investigations suggest an enemy drone approached as a US drone was coming into land. On their base by the Jordanian border, there was confusion over whether the explosive device was friend or foe, and it breached defences.
And the President's been crystal clear. We will respond decisively to any aggression. And we will hold responsible the people who attacked our troops. We'll do so at a time and a place of our choosing.
US and UK forces have already struck at Iranian-backed militia for a wave of attacks across the Middle East. America has pointed the finger of blame in the same direction for the fatal attack.
It's fundamentally different now because we have 3 families who just got the worst possible news. That's different.
Biden's challenge is to craft a course that asserts American authority and reinforces deterrence without escalating conflict. This was a picture he posted from the White House as Qatar's visiting Prime Minister registered his concerns as he brokers a deal to release hostages.
One way or another, it will have an impact on the regional security, and we hope that things get contained and not to get escalated beyond control.
Amidst questions over whether US retaliation will involve a strike in Iran itself, Tehran has denied involvement in the Jordanian attack.
Resistance groups across the region do not take orders from the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Islamic Republic of Iran, while it does not welcome expansion of conflicts in the region, doesn't interfere in decision-making by resistance groups.
At church on Sunday, Joe Biden paused in silence for those Americans killed. A president reflecting on events past and to come. James Matthews, Sky News in Washington.
Our international affairs editor Dominic Waghorn has this update from the Jordanian capital, Amman.
Joe Biden would have been given a range of options by Pentagon planners, ranging from the symbolic to the severely punitive. And he's got to find one that works in the sense of it restores American deterrence, because doing nothing, not doing enough is dangerous in this region. Weakness could encourage your enemies to do worse. But also he can't risk tipping the region into a major Middle Eastern war. We've been saying for some time now that the Iranians don't seem to want that and the Americans don't want it, but there's always the risk of miscalculation leading to escalation and this turning into a much bigger regional conflict. And we've also seen this deadly game of brinkmanship between Iranian-backed groups like Hezbollah, with Israel over the northern border exchanging artillery fire, and the Houthi rebels in Yemen directly taking on American and British navies, and then more than 150 attacks on American bases in Iraq, Syria and Jordan. And any one of those fault lines has the potential to become much bigger. And with this attack on this American base that killed 3 American soldiers, the Iranian-backed militia certainly raised the stakes. So the danger now is that Joe Biden ups the ante himself, overreacts, and then leaves Iran in a position where it can't do anything but escalate things further. It is a nerve-wracking moment for the Middle East.
The wreckage of Amelia Earhart's plane may have finally been discovered. Scans taken by deep-sea vision show what they think is the long-lost wreckage at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. She was the first female aviator to cross the Atlantic solo before disappearing on a round-the-world attempt. 5 people in the UK are believed to have developed Alzheimer's disease as a result of medical treatment decades earlier. Research pointed to a rogue protein that causes the form of dementia, taken from the brains of deceased people and given to children. The same protein is now produced synthetically. A woman has been seriously injured in a shark attack in Sydney Harbour, Australia. She was bitten on her right leg by what's thought to have been a bull shark during a swim on Monday evening. Shark attacks in Sydney Harbour are rare, but the area is known as a key habitat for bull sharks and their young.
Don't look behind you, whatever you do. Don't look behind you. Whatever you do, don't look over your shoulder.
I don't like the idea of the sea, it scares me.
Yeah, have a look, go on.
Oh, stop. The problem with underwater is there's too many areas of potential attack, whereas on land you at least know from underneath nothing's coming for you.
I agree. I'm not a fan either. I don't even like snorkelling.
No.
No, scary stuff. Thank you. Now, farmers in France are attempting to blockade Paris with hundreds of tractors. They're protesting against increasing red tape from the EU and the French government. Similar protests are also happening around Europe. Let's get more, should we? Standing by for us is Adam. He's in Paris. Hi, Adam, what's the plan?
Yeah, good morning, Kay. Well, this is Ranges produce market. It's the biggest produce market in the whole of Europe, and it's a really good indication of just how nervous the city is at the moment. Have a look down here. You can see this is the gendarmerie police who set up a blockade. And look, have a look over there. These are the big that they have wheeled out to try to protect Ranges. And why? Well, because there are convoys of farmers who are coming into this city. One is to try and raise the temperature, to try and say we've got all these legitimate concerns that we need to be earning more money, we need to be kept away from these burdensome restrictions. But the other thing they want to do is to try and reinforce their point by putting choke points, by, as one farmer said, starving Paris. And that means trying to stop traffic getting in and out. And one of the things they want to do is to get to this market and to stage a huge protest to stop food supplies getting around Paris. One government agency said this city only actually has enough food to keep going for 3 days. Now, you might imagine the police have responded. Yes, they have. There are 15,000 officers called up. They are checking vehicles as they come in and out of here. We are on the way, potentially, to a big standoff. Farmers are asking for 140 things from the government. We're going to hear from the new Prime Minister, Gabriel Attal, later today.
OK, for now, thanks, Adam. Quick look at the weather for you here.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, it's an improving picture today. Sunshine spreads south and east. We're currently seeing lots of cloud, grey weather, whatever that means, over many parts of England and Wales. And there are also a few spots of drizzle around as well. But across Scotland, Ireland and Northern Ireland, it's cold but sunny with a widespread frost. The cloudy weather will slowly edge eastwards during the day.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Housing Minister Lee Rowley. Is it Rowley or Rowley?
Rowley. Either's fine.
OK, joining us this morning. Good to see you, Minister. Thanks for taking the time. You want to talk to us about prioritising households who, amongst other things, have a close connection to the UK and their local area. What does that actually mean?
Well, we're consulting today, so the details are going to be talked about over the course of the next 8 weeks and beyond, but we want to make sure that social housing is used in a way. It's always going to be a finite resource. We've built more, but it's always going to be a finite resource. We want to make sure that we use it in a way which works, which supports the people who need it, but is also fair.
But does that mean British homes for British people?
We're proposing today UK citizens and those people who have had a right to remain for 10 years. So yes, we are looking at how we make sure people who've been in this country for a long time have most likely access to social housing, in the same way that people who have lived in a specific part of the UK for a period of time have a greater likelihood of getting social housing there.
What about those that don't fall into those categories?
Well, there are other tenures which are available, other ways to get housing, private rented sector and elsewhere. The government also has a clear responsibility to help those who are homeless, who need temporary accommodation. But fundamentally, with social housing being that finite resource, which I've just talked about, we have to make sure it's used in a way which works and which prioritises people who need it the most, but also people who play by the rules.
OK, so you're further down the list if you're not British or have indefinitely
we'll consult, but we are seeking to prioritise out of this, following the consultation.
Is that fair?
Of course it's fair. It's fair that people who've been here for a long time, who have paid into the system, get the access to social housing, which is a precious and finite resource.
Can I ask you about George Freeman, who you'll know resigned or was asked to resign during the latest reshuffle? He said that he couldn't afford to pay his mortgage, which is why he stepped back. He says that his mortgage rose from £800 per month to £2,000 a month, and on a ministerial salary, he couldn't afford it. If he can't afford it on a minister's salary, what hope is there for others? He earned £118,000 a year.
I haven't spoken to George, and I don't know his own personal circumstances, but if you pull back to the broader position, we know that interest rates have risen. We know that means that there are additional mortgage costs for some people. Interest rates have risen all across the world, higher in other countries than in the UK. And the job of government, we've got a plan, is to try and help people through difficult times and make sure that there is a clearer, brighter future ahead, which is what we're trying to do. Hopefully interest rates and therefore mortgage rates are going to start coming down. We've started to see some banks start to reduce their mortgage rates, which is positive, and that will hopefully help people of all income scales in the future.
I understand that, but what does it say about your policies, economic policies, if somebody who earns £118,000 a month can't afford £118,000 a year as a former government minister can't afford to pay their mortgage?
Well, I don't think the comparison is right. I don't know what George's personal circumstances
That's what he was saying, not me.
But what I do know is that we've accepted we've been through difficult times. We've accepted that there are greater pressures on household budgets. That's why the government's brought forward a whole heap of support for energy over the last couple of years, and it's why we're clear with our plan that we want interest rates to reduce. We can't abolish economic circumstances, particularly global ones, but we can have a plan, try and help people through those difficult times as we are.
OK, I mean, to that end, households are facing £2 billion in council tax increases across England this spring. How's that going to play out come an election, one wonders?
Well, it's ultimately for councils to decide how they want to raise tax. Some will raise it to a particular level, others to a lesser level. We know there are pressures on council services, which is why we supported local authorities with the best part of £500 million of additional funding last week. And it's ultimately for individual councillors elected to support their communities to decide how they want to spend that money and what they want to do with council tax.
Does the government acknowledge that the financial burden when it comes to council tax lands with the poorest households?
We know that council tax has an impact, just like the BBC licence fee has an impact on some of the poorest households. Let's not go there, should we? Well, but it's important.
We can if you want, but I didn't think I was going to today.
But we have to recognise that my job as a minister, the job of government, the job of the Prime Minister is to try to see how we can reduce tax in all circumstances, which is what the Conservatives want to do. We've reduced some national insurance just a few months ago. Labour aren't going to reduce those taxes because Labour just want to take us back to square one.
Are you going to say they've got no plan?
Well, they haven't got a plan, so I don't even need to say it, Kate, because you know they've got no plan either.
You're drilling it into me, you guys. But going back to the point, the serious point, do you acknowledge that when it comes to council tax and license, the biggest financial burden lands with those that are least able to pay it?
And that's why we want councils to be very cautious about making decisions which would raise council tax as high as they can. But ultimately, it is for councils to decide. And what the government is trying to do is support councils with additional funding and also reduce taxes nationally.
Allow me to bring you slightly off brief and talk about strikes on the railways. Back in December, the Transport Minister said £65,000 was on the table for ASLEF. Mick Whelan said he'd be willing to meet, but they're on strike. What's happened?
Well, the unions, in my view, don't need to be on strike. They're impacting my constituents in North East Derbyshire right now who want to get to work, and they shouldn't be doing that. I don't know why they're striking. I wish they weren't. This is a very long-standing dispute. People just want to get on with getting to work, and the unions should just stop and call the strike on.
Is £65,000 enough for driving trains?
Yes.
So you're asking them to go back to work. You can actually, I'm guessing, make them go back to work, or certainly their employers can, because you change the laws. So why are those not being implemented? What would you be saying to the rail companies this morning?
Well, I hope they'll use them in the future. I'm not close to it, as you say, but as a housing minister rather than a rail minister. But what I understand is that the rail companies have said they may use them in the future. I think
Shouldn't
that
they
would
be
be
using them now?
Arguably, I hope that they would. And I think the Prime Minister said he's disappointed that they're not using them. It's ultimately for the rail operators to decide. But those laws are there across a number of sectors to make sure that when strikes happen, that people are not inconvenienced more than they need to be. And ultimately, none of this would be necessary if the unions didn't call them necessary strikes.
DUP. Let's talk about the DUP. Power sharing has been restored. Do you think the deal that has been done will get the full backing of Conservative MPs here?
Well, I hope so. I mean, this is a sensitive area. It's one that we need to take step by step. It's tentatively good news that the DUP have said they're going to come back into power sharing after several years away from that. It's obviously got to go through further processes. Other parties will announce when we can. Chris Heaton-Harris, the Northern Ireland Secretary, I know, is working very hard on this, but I definitely hope it will be welcomed by people all across the political spectrum.
Sounds
it's
like
important.
you're cautious. Are you cautiously optimistic?
Hopefully, yes. I mean, we believe in devolution. We want devolution to work, whether it's in Northern Ireland or elsewhere. We want the Assembly back. We want the Executive back. We hope it will be successful, but there's still a few more steps to go.
Do you trust the DUP?
I've got no reason not to trust the DUP.
Oh, really?
Of course, the DUP are acting in good faith. The DUP are standing up for the people that they represent. Northern Ireland is a very complicated area of politics, as you and I know, but ultimately, I think the last few hours have demonstrated a positive step forward, and I hope it continues.
Yesterday, the Iceland boss and former Tory donor made a big deal about converting to the Labour Party. He says he's going to be a Labour Party supporter in future. He even gave Keir Starmer a badge with his name on it.
Well,
have you got one? No, you haven't.
I haven't got one, no. I mean, it is up to individuals to make decisions about who they support.
It's a blow, though, isn't it?
Well, it is up to Richard. If Richard Walker wants to support the Labour Party, I mean, that's not news. I mean, he talked about it was likely he was going to go there. He was talking about not being very happy a number of months ago. But the only party that is supporting businesses, it believes in wealth creation, that wants to make sure that we get money from businesses to be able to support the public services that we all want, is the Conservatives. It's obviously been difficult.
It's a blow, though, isn't it?
I don't think this blow particularly. There are many businesses, many businessmen and women who support the Conservative Party. And people know underneath that the Labour Party is not serious. It doesn't have a plan. And ultimately, the Conservatives, despite a difficult situation, are trying to get us through.
OK, we are out of time, so I'm going to have to let you go because I'm on my best behaviour today. It's good to see you. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. Thank you. So let's talk about that in a bit more detail, should we? We're talking about Stormont, and power sharing has been restored, at least for now. It does have to be brought back to the Parliament here in Westminster as well, though, and Conservative MPs have to support it. Certainly got the impression, Amanda, from the Minister that he was cautiously optimistic.
Yes, I think you said you sound quite cautious, and he said hopefully is his response. So absolutely, I think the government don't want to look like they're counting their ducks, that they've got their ducks in a row before they have.
Counting their chickens.
Yes, there we go. Obviously it is incredibly sensitive, as he highlighted there. But clearly they are optimistic. Months and months of work have gone into this to get to this point. He talked also about the fact that the government believes in devolution, that it is very important to get power sharing up and running, but of course, other parties in Northern Ireland have to be brought into the process now today before the deal is finalised. And as you pointed out, Tory MPs, as well as the implications with the deal with the rest of the EU as well.
OK, for now, thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Still to come on The Breakfast Show, a judge rules that Laurence Fox libelled two people when he referred to them as paedophiles. We'll hear from the drag queen that sued him. Another volley of missiles from North Korea overnight. We'll get the latest from our correspondent in Beijing. And NASA's $10 billion space project reveals the beautiful spiral galaxies just beyond the Milky Way.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
It's really desperate. That is actually the sort of pretty much hopeless column. We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people.
You either live and recover, or you die.
OK, so that's like a war.
That's the war.
We help you understand the world with us. Over the past 24 hours, the soldiers have been attacked on a number of occasions.
It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change.
Take you to the heart of stories that shape our world. They were convinced the United States would become hooked. Well, they were right.
An enormous explosion has just come down. It's not out of control, but they've withdrawn. It's so hot.
Again, everybody, welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Coming up for you, we're going to be joined by the drag queen that took Laurence Fox to court and won. That in just a few moments' time. Also, talking about Lords reform today. We've been doing a bit of research, haven't we, on Lords reform, on law, actually the institution that is the House of Lords, and who can be one.
Yes, and kind of also the mix of people that are Lords as well. I was looking earlier about the fact that it's 555 men versus 228 women. It is far from representative in that respect.
Yep, an institution set up in the 11th century, and if they tip up, they don't have to vote or whatever, just tip up, sign in, 352 quid a day, £342 a day. I'm sorry, my lords.
Yeah, that's not bad, is it? But given that, there's still only normally around 300 or so who turn up most days. So, you know, out of nearly 800, I mean, it's the second largest chamber of representatives in the world, second only to the Chinese People's Assembly, I think. So it is quite an extraordinary number. There's always talk about bringing those numbers down, trying to make it more actually democratically accountable and representative. Labour saying they would abolish it, replace it with a regional assembly. Well, we've heard various suggestions along these lines before, which haven't quite happened. But certainly, I mean, it does really seem to be on the table at the moment, particularly with all these new appointments to the Lords we've seen recently from all the various prime ministers we've seen departing and causing various controversy with the names that they've put forward.
Yeah, hereditary peers, that was 92, wasn't it, when Labour tried, 99, forgive me, when they tried to change that.
Temporary.
Yeah, but their role is to... So when there's a law to be passed in the House of Commons, the role of the House of Lords is to scrutinise the legislation.
Scrutinise the legislation. I think the idea is there's kind of a chamber of elders who are not elected, obviously, as we well know, who can scrutinise, push it back. At the end of the day, there is policy that allows the Commons to overrule the Lords, and they can usurp the Lords' authority. And if there is plans for an elected chamber. I was just looking at some of the other elections we can have. Police and crime commissioners, average turnout for that, 33.2%. Steve Rotherham, the Mayor of Liverpool in 2021, elected on a turnout of 29.5%. And you think, well, what would the turnout be if we do have an elected upper chamber? And how democratic would that vote be if you've only got maybe 1 in 3 people voting for it?
Sure. Headlines?
Bring you the headlines this morning. Let's look at our top stories. We're going to start with that news that hardline unionists have protested, but after marathon talks, the DUP has agreed a deal with the UK government to restore power sharing to Northern Ireland. Travel chaos looms as several days of railway strikes begin today, affecting 8 services across the UK. The US President Joe Biden has weighed up United States retaliation, and Lord Cameron has headed back to the Middle East. That's after US soldiers were killed in a drone strike, and those 3 soldiers have been named. Farmers across France are continuing their protests, using hundreds of tractors to block key routes into the capital, Paris. They want better pay for their produce, they want less red tape, and they also are calling for greater protection against cheaper imports.
High Court judge has ruled that the actor-turned-politician Laurence Fox libelled two people when he referred to them as paedophiles on social media. Fox was sued by former Stonewall trustee Simon Blake and drag artist Crystal over a row on X, but it was then Twitter, wasn't it, back in October of 2020. Look who's with us. I think you can guess it's not Simon Blake.
Someone who's made far too much effort for this time.
You look sensational.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Tell me what happened.
Well, it's been 3 years in the making, but the long and short of it is I called Laurence Fox a racist, and he retaliated by calling me a paedophile. The judge found yesterday that me calling him a racist was not defamatory, and him calling me a paedophile was. So we've had a victory on all counts, and it's incredibly liberating and satisfying after 3 long years of this.
Why did you decide to take him to court? Because it's a very long, arduous, challenging, emotional ride, isn't it?
Yeah, I think if I'd known at the outset that it was going to be 3.5 years later that we'd still be talking about this, I may have thought twice. But honestly, he's a bully, and accusations of paedophilia against people in the queer community, against drag queens, these are old tropes, and I didn't want to stand for it. I didn't want to let that slide. It honestly felt like if I didn't pursue this to the very end, that it was a tacit admission as well. I needed to see it through and make it clear that there was no basis in fact to this.
Why do you think Laurence Fox is a racist?
I think he's done and said many things over the last years that I've been aware of him that are deeply racist, and you know, he subscribes to a very narrow view of what racism is, that it's specifically hostility against someone because of the color of their skin. I take a broader view that it can account for a wide range of behaviors, but I think everyone would agree that saying F off back to Jamaica to someone who's black is a racist statement. I think that someone going into blackface is behaving in a racist way.
The judge, just to clarify, the judge didn't make a ruling on whether describing Fox as a racist is substantially true, after finding that the 3 tweets cited in his counterclaim were unlikely to cause serious harm to his reputation.
That's correct. But she did also say that it was unlikely to be defamatory because we couldn't possibly harm him with that accusation because he'd harmed his own reputation so badly.
Do you have any sympathy for him? His career, I think it's fair to say, is not doing well.
I think I have sympathy for the people who have continually been targeted as pedophiles, nonces, and groomers by far-right people that he's emboldened. I think there's a huge swathe of the population that are experiencing this nastiness right now, and I think it's part of what he's contributed to creating. You know, the downfall of his own career is his own doing. And do
you have any sympathy for him, though, as a human being?
It's hard to, because I've spent the last 3 years feeling very attacked by him. So I'm not there yet.
What was he like in court?
Erratic, defensive. He used the N-word in the box. He defended blackface. He couldn't agree that saying "I hate black people" was a racist statement. It was really hard to watch.
How do you feel about X, Twitter? No, it's a sewer.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I'm thankful that I still have my own little bubble, which is mostly supportive and surrounded by people that are like-minded. But every now and then, yeah, you kick the hornet's nest and you find out there's a whole other swathe of people out there who are very angry and disagree with you very strongly. It's a hard place to be, and I miss the old days of it.
Did you find that there was a pile-on after you took Laurence Fox on?
Absolutely. I mean, the day he called me a paedophile, I received dozens of horrible messages. There's not enough bullets in the world. Things like this. Horrible things to read. And that hasn't stopped in the 3 years since. You know, there have been flare-ups ever since. If I write an article for the Metro about how drag can be appropriate for children, it happens again. And his was the first time that ever happened to me, but it hasn't stopped since. And I really hope that this judgment goes some way to reminding people that using those words is defamatory and there will be consequences.
Love your makeup. How long did it take? How long did it take?
Just 5 minutes, you know.
You woke up like that, didn't you?
Yeah, I didn't actually go to bed.
What's it like at the moment? How's your career?
Great. I'm excited for the year ahead. I'm doing lots of DJing, lots of Pride gigs, and there's even some talk about turning these court transcripts into some kind of play or musical.
Okay, well, you look fantastic. Thank you so much for taking, and congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Let me just bring you some breaking news just reaching us here at Sky Centre. A Pakistani court has sentenced the former Prime Minister Imran Khan to 10 years for exposing official secrets. His party says we'll bring you more on that as soon as we get it. So Imran Khan, so many of you will recognise him not only as the ex-Pakistan PM, but also as a Pakistani cricketer. We are being told that he has been sentenced to 10 years for sharing official secrets. We'll get more on that and we will update you just as soon as we can. In other news, North Korea has launched several cruise missiles, according to South Korea. Our Asia correspondent, Helen Ann Smith, is standing by in Beijing for us. Hi, Helen Ann, what more do we know?
Good morning, Kay. Well, South Korea's military confirmed this morning that North Korea has fired several cruise missiles off the west coast of the country. And it's notable because it's actually the third time in just a week that this particular type of cruise missile has been launched by the North Koreans. As we know, them firing weapons, not highly unusual, but this is a new type of missile. It's called the Pulwasal 331. And essentially, the North Koreans are saying it is the type of missile that could theoretically be launched from a submarine, and it's all part of their program to modernise their navy, and they hope develop a sort of weapons system that could theoretically launch ballistic missiles from submarines. It all comes at a time where tensions on the North Korean peninsula are really the worst they have been for many, many years, partly because the South Koreans, the Americans and the Japanese have been doing joint drills, but also because there's been this real notable change in tone from Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea. Just last week, he did a major speech in the capital, Pyongyang, essentially saying that his country is going to move away from a policy they have held for decades to seek reunification with South Korea. Instead, now they're much more pushing, it seems, for sort of the annihilation of South Korea, the takeover, if you like. A real change in tone, something that experts say dictates the fact that he may be looking for more serious conflict. It is a very, very tense time on the Korean peninsula for sure.
OK, for now, thank you. Quick look through the papers with Amanda. Where should we start?
Well, let's start with the Times, shall we?
Yeah.
They've got this fairly dramatic story about Iranian dissidents being warned of a threat from Iran. It follows sort of death threats against a number of journalists working for Iranian TV in London, and sanctions announced yesterday by the government. But the Times have found out that there are many more threats being made to people on the streets of London.
King out of hospital, Princess of Wales as well, are now convalescing at home. Moving on to other pages for us, please. There we go. The Eye, Cameron to warn that UK facing biggest threat since the Cold War. Thanks for that, Lord Cameron. Moving on to others. Dismay as households face £2 billion council tax increase. Put that to the minister. He gave that a body swerve, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we understand the government are going to promise more and more tax cuts in the budget, but we know that councils are really facing a huge shortfall in the money they have, despite this extra £600 million they've been given by the government. So, yeah, big political issues only going to get bigger.
Two other papers quickly. The Daily Express, new fast-track NHS test. That quick. And the Daily Telegraph, farmers lay siege to Paris. We've been hearing more about that as well.
Yes, absolutely. They know how to do a strike in France, don't they? Cut off the whole of Paris from food supplies for 3 days.
Enough standing up for you. We're going to let you go sit down again. Still to come on The Breakfast Show. We're going to be speaking to hostage negotiator Scott Walker after suggestions we could see a pause in fighting in Gaza to allow for a prisoner exchange.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
It's really desperate. That is actually the sort of pretty much hopeless column.
We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people.
You either live and recover, or you die.
OK, so that's like a war.
That's the war.
We help you understand the world with us.
Over the past 24 hours, the soldiers have been attacked on a number of occasions.
It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change.
Take you to the heart of stories that shape our world. They were convinced the United States would become hooked. Well, they were right.
An enormous explosion has just come down. It's not out of control, but they've withdrawn. It's so hot.
Again, everybody, let's turn our attentions to the Middle East again. Senior US officials have said fighting in Gaza could be paused for 2 months should US negotiators reach a deal on getting dozens of hostages out. Let's talk more with Scott Walker, hostage negotiator. Hi, Scott. It's good to see you again. Thanks for taking the time. You've obviously seen what's been said. What's your take?
Well, it's obviously welcome news, the progress that's getting the rest of the hostages out. And it will also mean being able to get some more aid into Gaza as well. However, as I've stressed all the way throughout, just because we've got an agreement here, it's not the same as the safe release of the hostages. So we're still a long way from a safe resolution here.
How surprised are you that we've got to a position where potentially we could see fighting paused for 45 days, 35 Israeli hostages released and up to 4,000 Palestinian prisoners released from Israeli jails, when many people, I think it's fair to say, would have thought all was lost?
Which is why it's a long game. Every single negotiation I've been involved in is taking a long time, usually to resolve. Things go wrong, it's never a streamlined process. And so I think because the negotiations have been taking place in the background, despite not really being in the media's attention over the last couple of weeks, I think it's proving the case that where we find ourselves
How
now.
do you negotiate something like this?
Well, I think it's been with the Qataris and the Americans and the Israelis keeping those lines of communication open throughout, with Hamas leadership as well.
OK, but to get the two opposing sides around a table, impossible. So you have to get those acting as their agents to try to have the negotiation and then go back and report back and then come back again. So I'm guessing that's why it takes such a long time. But what obstacles, apart from that, do they face? And when a pause in fighting is in place, how do you then try to negotiate for that to go on?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, trust is the number one factor here.
There you go, yeah.
And it's the one thing that is
How do you
missing
do
on
that,
both
though?
sides,
Yeah.
which is why they're using the mediators through Qatar and Egypt, who do have the trust and the relationships with Hamas leadership and with the Americans and the Israelis. So they've been pivotal in smoothing the waters and ironing out the difficulties to make sure these negotiations can continue despite the challenges and the setbacks that we see.
And what's your advice for the desperate families who wait minute by minute to hear about their loved ones?
Keep hope. Keep hope. This is a welcome step. It's a welcome progress. However, we need to remain cautious until the hostages are back safely.
And looking from afar, how confident are you that all of the hostages that are still alive can be released?
Yeah, very confident that what the last few months have shown us is that progress can be made despite all the obstacles and the challenges that we're facing. Actually, the negotiations are taking place, which means that the hostages are likely to come back.
So you think all of them?
Hopefully, yeah.
It's great to see you. Thanks,
Thank you
Scott.
very
Much
much.
appreciated. Thank you. Quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
An improving picture today over many places as the sunshine spreads south and east. We're currently seeing lots of cloudy grey weather over many parts of England and Wales, and there are also a few spots of drizzle around as well. But across Scotland, Ireland and Northern Ireland, it's cold but sunny with widespread frost. The cloudy weather will slowly edge eastwards during the day.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
I want to talk about NASA in just a second, but I know that you've had an opportunity to catch up on what's happening with Imran Khan.
Yeah, so this is the former cricketer turned Pakistani president, came to power in July 2018, was hoping to be the first Pakistani leader to serve a full 5-year term, but was ousted after a no-confidence vote, and then facing this slew of charges and criminal cases, has just been jailed for, handed a 10-year prison sentence alongside his former foreign minister. This is following corruption charges, but he also faces terrorism charges, 170 legal cases. He had pledged to reform the country when he came to power in 2018, but the economy and the rupee tanked. In 2019, the IMF had to bail the country out. And there are suggestions, because the military is highly powerful in Pakistani politics, that he probably fell out of favour with the military, and that's what led to the no-confidence vote and these following cases that have come along in a slew of them ever since.
Yeah.
Incredibly volatile situation there, isn't it? It's difficult
Wasn't he married
to watch.
To Jemima Goldsmith?
He was indeed, yes.
One
of the world's richest heiresses, but then they were divorced, weren't they? But certainly a man with a very colourful life.
Yeah.
But in terms of what this means for democracy in Pakistan, it's not good.
I've interviewed him many times, actually. He's been into the Sky News studios a lot. He was always, shall I say, a tricky customer to interview. We'll get more on that and update you further. Let me tell you that NASA have released the latest series of photographs captured by its $10 billion James Webb Space Telescope. They show 19 spiral galaxies, all tens of millions of light years away from the Milky Way. But for a universe that's almost 100 billion light years wide, that's a relative stone's throw, apparently. You can tell that I'm not really interested in space, can't you? It just doesn't do it for me at all. Doesn't do it for me.
They are beautiful.
The problem is all of the words make sense individually, but then when you put it together in 100 billion light years, my mind just evaporates. I struggle to comprehend what I'm being told.
Yeah, I'm much more interested in what Elon Musk is up to.
Yes, this is incredible, isn't it? So the first implant has been, by his company Neuralink, has been implanted in someone's brain, and they are said to be recovering well. And it's these tiny, gossamer thin hairline threads that have been implanted in the brain. And the idea is that then that will connect via an app to a device which theoretically could allow someone who doesn't have the use of their limbs to control a computer or a mobile phone, give them incredible freedom. So
amazing. Wilfred, what do you think? Morning.
Good morning to you all. I think completely incredible, of course, if it really does work. And as he said last night, he's calling this product telepathy and would allow you to control your phone with just a thought. I mean, personally, I think we're a bit too connected to all of our devices at the moment already, but this is not exactly what the aim of this product is, as Amanda was saying, to help perhaps those without limbs to connect to things like phones. Early days, of course, it's the first time Neuralink, his company, has made a human implant. There are a few other companies doing something similar, but I think we're a long way off this being mainstream. But extraordinary innovation once again from a Musk-backed startup.
You say that, Wilf, but I mean, 11 surgeries they're planning in 2024, 27 in 2025, 79 by the time they've rolled it out in 2026, and it's costing something like $10,500. So it is potentially affordable, certainly for insurance companies.
Absolutely, but I don't think you'll get it being widespread until there's 79,000 bits of data, not just 79 bits of data. But it does speak to, which you're getting at, the amazing advances that take place. And for all the criticism Elon Musk gets, the list of companies he is behind, the innovation. He was one of the co-founders of OpenAI, don't forget, which we talk about a lot at the moment. Obviously, PayPal originally, Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink now. I mean, it is quite extraordinary, the innovation he has been either directly behind or seriously involved with.
Yeah.
Makes me think of people, for example, that have locked-in syndrome, where the only thing they can communicate with is their eyelids or even their eyes. Potentially for people who are completely cognitive abilities completely there, but they can't speak for themselves. This could be huge for people in that situation.
Well, he's raised the example of the late Professor Stephen Hawking and saying, imagine if he could communicate as quickly as a speed typist or an auctioneer, the kind of ideas we would have had fizzing out of someone like that, to overcome those kinds of very difficult disabilities. I mean, it could be an absolute game changer.
I always think about Christopher Reeve, actually, who was Superman, of course, and Superman, and then he fell off his horse and became a quadriplegic. Wilf, I'm guessing you're going to be dealing with the DUP as well, are you?
We will. A little bit of everything, of course, and the other thing we'll be building up to as well are those annual economic forecast numbers that will come out from the IMF at 1 o'clock today. So we'll have that live when it crosses, and we'll be building up to that as well.
OK, we'll look forward to seeing you from 10 o'clock. For now, thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. We're also talking about the DUP and Lord's reform, aren't we?
Lord's reform as well. That article that's in the paper saying that Betty Boothroyd wanted to...
Betty Boothroyd, loved her.
What a legend.
Fantastic. Wanted to kind of call for a reform of the House of Lords, didn't she?
Was she from Yorkshire?
I don't know, but I'll look into it.
I think she might have...
All the best people.
I think she might have been from Lancashire.
Straight talking.
Best thing, as I said, out of the M62, out of Yorkshire is the M62.
It's all in the delivery.
It's all in the delivery. Thank you very much. We'll be here in the next hour. I'm not sure where he'll be.
Getting more salt in his tea.
We'll see you in just a moment. Do stay tuned. We're here on Sky. Good morning, everybody. It's 8 o'clock. Coming up on today's programme, we're talking about the DUP's deal with the UK government, which tells us it's tentatively good news.
Plus, we're debating two political hot potatoes. Is the House of Lords too full? And British houses for British people. We explored that with the government minister too.
Plus, we hear from the drag star who successfully sued Laurence Fox in a libel case, who says he's the victim of his own undoing.
It's Tuesday, the 30th of January. Hardline unionists protest. Hardline unionists protest, but after marathon talks, the DUP agrees a deal with the UK government to restore power sharing to Northern Ireland.
I believe that my party has acted decisively based upon the proposals that are before us.
Train pain and cancellations as drivers walk out in a dispute over pay. We put it to the minister.
Is £65,000 enough for driving trains?
Yes.
Former Pakistan PM Imran Khan is handed a 10-year jail term for leaking state secrets. A pivotal moment as the US soldiers killed in a drone strike unnamed. Joe Biden weighs up US retaliation and Lord Cameron heads back to the Middle East. Telepathy is real. We reveal Elon Musk's latest brainchild, giving a human a computer brain implant. Farmers protest around Europe in a battle with government over their industry's future. Good morning and thanks for joining us here on The Breakfast Show. Our top story for you this morning and the breaking news you're waking up to. The DUP has agreed a deal to return to power sharing in Northern Ireland, subject to legislation to be put forward by the UK government. Power sharing collapsed nearly 2 years ago when the party protested against post-Brexit trade arrangements. Our senior Ireland correspondent David Blevins reports from Belfast.
There were protests outside the meeting.
Honour your word.
And an activist opposed to any compromise was live tweeting from a source inside. But the Democratic Unionist leader emerged from his party executive, having won support for his deal with the UK government.
The package of measures in totality does provide a basis for our party to nominate members to the Northern Ireland Executive, thus seeing the restoration of the locally elected institutions.
It's 2 years since the DUP ended power sharing at Stormont in opposition to the Brexit border in the Irish Sea. But the government has pledged to table legislation to address unionist concerns over Northern Ireland's place in the United Kingdom. That's not enough for hardline unionists who accuse the DUP of selling out and letting the UK government off the hook.
Well, it is the job of the British government to make sure its borders are secure and that the union remains intact. And it's not doing that. So the first thing we must do is get rid of this Tory traitor government.
It's just unbelievable the way things have panned out. But we need good leadership and we don't have it from the British government or from our own people.
The DUP held the meeting behind closed doors, but a prominent loyalist went viral by posting a running commentary. The protests outside were predictable, but no one could have anticipated details of this highly confidential meeting being live tweeted from inside, an indication of the divisions within unionism and the challenges faced by Sir Geoffrey Donaldson. He has faced down his critics within and without to restore the power sharing at the heart of the peace process. David Blevins, Sky News in County Down.
I'll be chatting to Amanda in just a second about the impact that it's going to have here in Westminster, what needs to happen here in order for it to go forward. Meantime, Stephen's joining us from Belfast, I believe. Hi, Stephen. So, what a day and night it was.
A night of high drama, a meeting that dragged on for many hours, and we eventually saw Sir Geoffrey Donaldson emerge to update the media on the news somewhere around 1 o'clock this morning. So it's still very much a developing story. It's a story Northern Ireland is waking up to, but it now looks as though after 2 years of limbo here at Stormont, we are on the path, on the final path to seeing devolved government return to Stormont. It all depends, of course, on legislation in London being brought forward and passing in the days to come, but we will see, assuming that all goes to plan, the politicians here in Northern Ireland returning here to Stormont. They'll elect a speaker for the Northern Ireland Assembly, and then we will see a First Minister and Deputy First Minister elected. The First Minister will be Michelle O'Neill from Sinn Féin, the first time ever since these institutions were established under the Good Friday Agreement that Northern Ireland will have a nationalist First Minister, although the two jobs are essentially hold the same power, and one cannot exist without the other, but symbolically it will be a huge moment for Northern Ireland. And then most importantly really for the people here in Northern Ireland. Kay, you may remember the last time I spoke to you here from Northern Ireland, we saw a day of unprecedented strike action a week and a half ago. There's more transit strikes happening this coming Thursday. The UK government has promised a £3.3 billion package for Northern Ireland, dependent on the return of Stormont, including around £600 million to try and resolve those public sector pay issues. It's everyday issues that really affect the people here in Northern Ireland. That's why they want to see this place back up and running as soon as possible.
OK, for now, Stephen, thanks. Needs to be ratified here?
Yes, it does, absolutely. And there's still various steps that need to go through with the other political parties in Northern Ireland. So I think that's really why we're seeing the government being very cautious about this morning. We've had the Northern Irish Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris, saying it's a welcome, positive step. The UK government will stick to the offers that were made to the DUP to get them to agree with this. And earlier we had the Minister on, who you asked him whether he was cautiously optimistic, and he said, well, hopefully, yes. We believe in devolution. We believe in getting the devolved government back up and running in Stormont. And of course, for Rishi Sunak, when he became Prime Minister, this really was a big priority for him, was trying to resolve the difficulties surrounding the deal struck by Boris Johnson when he was pledging to get Brexit done, which is seen as such a betrayal by the unionist parties in Northern Ireland. So Rishi Sunak did manage to get the Windsor framework struck with the EU, but that wasn't seen as going far enough. So I think he'll be very pleased to see this going forward, if indeed it ultimately does.
Well, we'll see. And we'll also be hearing from Labour very shortly. Former Northern Ireland Minister or Secretary? Peter Carl.
Yes, the Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary, yes, indeed.
There we go. Now, the first train strikes of the year start today and will last into early next week. Let's tell you about them. Many of the busiest commuter routes are crippled today. 8 services affected as both ASLEF and the R&T unions go on strike over pay. The South and London will be hit the hardest. South Eastern Gatwick Express and Greater Northern will have no service. There's a reduced service on South Eastern and South Western, including the Island Line. And Thameslink is running a severely reduced shuttle service, which will travel between London, St Pancras and Luton only. Well, last month, the Transport Minister said a £65,000 offer was on the table for ASLEF drivers, which their General Secretary, Mick Whelan, says he's happy to meet about. So I asked the Government Minister this morning, why is all this still going on?
Well, the unions, in my view, don't need to be on strike. They're impacting my constituents in North East Derbyshire right now who want to get to work, and they shouldn't be doing that. I don't know why they're striking. I wish they weren't. This is a very long-standing dispute. People just want to get on with getting to work, and the unions should just stop and call the strike on.
Is £65,000 enough?
The answer, he said, was no. Yes, in fact, one of them. Amelia is standing by at Waterloo Station for us this morning. Hello to you, Amelia. So the Minister did say that £65,000 was enough. I wonder what commuters think this morning.
Well, it's not nearly as busy here as it would normally be, Kay, and that's because this is the start of a week's, nearly a week's worth, I should say, of strikes at England's national rail operators. Train drivers at ASLEF, that's the drivers' union, are walking out in an ever-increasing and bitter row over pay, and it's also, much to the misery of commuters, coincided with a 9-day overtime ban as well, which started yesterday. South Western says, which operates out of here, says only travel unless absolutely necessary, and trains will only run between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. But these strikes were set to be the first test, really, of the government's new minimum service legislation, which would allow train companies to mandate that staff come in and work to allow 40% of services to run. LNER was initially going to use this new law, but after threats of 5 more days of strikes from ASLEF, they backed down, and so none of these companies are using this new law, much to the disappointment of the government. Well, really, commuters here are going to be feeling the pain yet again. We're going to see disruption for the rest of the day. The message is check before you travel.
OK, for now, thanks very much indeed. We'll be hearing from Labour in just a few moments' time. Wonder what they think about the striking rail workers. Breaking news as well.
Yes, this is from Pakistan. This is the so-called cipher case that surrounds the former Prime Minister Imran Khan. He was accused of leaking a diplomatic cable that was sent by the Pakistani ambassador in Washington to the government in Islamabad. He's now been sentenced to 10 years in jail for leaking state secrets. A decision announced by a special court that had been set up under the Secrets Act. The judge was hearing this case in Adalia jail, and it comes as the country prepares to hold elections on the 8th of February. Imran Khan barred from standing in those elections, and he himself has been in jail since August 2023 on corruption charges, which he says is politically motivated. We'll have plenty more on that in the coming hours. Meanwhile, Joe Biden is weighing up retaliation to the drone strike by Iranian-backed militants, which killed 3 US soldiers at a base known as Tower 22 in Jordan. More details have emerged about the attack, with reports the air defence system was switched off to allow an American drone to return to the base. The Pentagon says the strike came from Kataib Hezbollah, thought to be loyal to and funded by Iran. For its part, Tehran has denied any involvement. The question today is, what's Biden's next step?
And the President's been crystal clear. We will respond decisively to any aggression. And we will hold responsible the people who attacked our troops. We'll do so at a time and a place of our choosing.
Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, has this update from the Jordanian capital, Amman.
Joe Biden would have been given a range of options by Pentagon planners, ranging from the symbolic to the severely punitive. And he's got to find one that works in the sense of it restores American deterrence, because doing nothing, not doing enough is dangerous in this region. Weakness could encourage your enemies to do worse. But also he can't risk tipping the region into a major Middle Eastern war. We've been saying for some time now that the Iranians don't seem to want that and the Americans don't want it, but there's always the risk of miscalculation leading to escalation and this turning into a much bigger regional conflict. And we've also seen this deadly game of brinkmanship between Iranian-backed groups like Hezbollah, with Israel over the northern border exchanging artillery fire, and the Houthi rebels in Yemen directly taking on American and British navies, and then more than 150 attacks on American bases in Iraq, Syria and Jordan. And any one of those fault lines has the potential to become much bigger. And with this attack on this American base that killed 3 American soldiers, the Iranian-backed militia certainly raised the stakes. So the danger now is that Joe Biden ups the ante himself, overreacts, and then leaves Iran in a position where it can't do anything but escalate things further. It is a nerve-wracking moment for the Middle East.
Farmers across France are continuing their protests, using hundreds of tractors to block key routes into the capital. They want better pay for their produce, less red tape and protection against cheaper imports. Traffic around Brussels was also disrupted yesterday by protesting farmers there. The wreckage of Amelia Earhart's aeroplane may have finally been discovered. Scans taken by Deep Sea Vision show what they think is the long-lost wreckage at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. She was the first female aviator to cross the Atlantic solo before disappearing on a round-the-world attempt. 5 people in the UK are believed to have developed Alzheimer's disease as a result of medical treatment they received decades earlier. Research pointed to a rogue protein that causes the form of dementia, taken from the brains of deceased people and given to children. The same protein is now produced synthetically. A woman has been seriously injured in a shark attack in Sydney Harbour. She was bitten on her right leg by what's thought to have been a bull shark during a swim on Monday evening. Shark attacks in Sydney Harbour are rare, but the area is known as a key habitat for both bull sharks and their young.
Goodness, this is a story that's just breaking. Let's bring you more on the news that the Bank of England has just fined HSBC Bank almost £60 million. Ian is with us. Why, Ian?
Morning, Kay. This refers to failings under the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, which is the scheme under which the first £85,000 worth of a depositor's money is protected, underwritten by the government in the event of a bank failing. Now, what the Prudential Regulation Authority, which is the regulatory arm of the Bank of England, says is that HSBC failed to accurately identify which deposits of their customers were eligible for protection under the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. HSBC also failed to identify a senior manager who was in charge of ensuring that those deposits were appropriately marked. And in addition, the PRA says that the Bank of England failed to be open and cooperative with the PRA for a period of around 15 months after these problems had been identified. So, as you say, the PRA has fined HSBC £57.4 million. It's the second largest ever fine imposed by the PRA. The record was the now defunct Credit Suisse, which was hit with an £87 million levy in July of last year. And the PRA actually saying the fine could have been as high as £96 million, but because HSBC cooperated, the fine has been reduced. The PRA also making clear that this wasn't deliberate or reckless conduct on the part of HSBC, so it was rather down to carelessness.
OK, for now. Thanks, Ian. At 11:30, 4:30, Ian King Live. Don't miss it. Excellent show. Let's have a quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It's an improving picture today over many places. The sunshine spreads south and east. Currently seeing lots of cloudy grey weather over many parts of England and Wales. And there are also a few spots of drizzle. Thank you. Marking my homework. Just you wait until I'm interviewing you. But across Scotland, Ireland and Northern Ireland, it's cold but sunny with a widespread frost.
I thought you were talking about me.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Shadow Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology and former Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary is with us now, Peter Kyle, of course. Nice to see you.
You too.
I'll be talking to you later about laughing at me, trying to do my job. Before that, though, talk to me about Stormont.
Well, it's good. I mean, let's see what happens today. I mean, we've had a few moments where we've become quite close to getting a deal across the line, and it's fallen apart at the last minute. So let's give all of the actors there, all the participants there, the space they need to have these final sets of negotiations. I really wish Jeffrey Donaldson well. I think the leadership he's shown at this moment has been really tough. It's a very difficult thing he's doing. But if we can get Stormont up and running again, it would be huge, because there's a lot of pent-up investment in Northern Ireland, in public sector wages, in investment for public services, and then also all of the challenges that have with identity politics there. If we can just get things facing the future again, then culturally, politically, and economically, it would be good news for Northern Ireland and the whole UK and the island of Ireland.
What do you see as potential elephant traps?
Well, there's lots of personalities. The Unionist movement and the DUP as a party is a very, very broad church with lots of very strident views in it and lots of characters there. Jeffrey and the leadership team, because he has a good leadership team there, would have been doing a lot of negotiation. It's not just him making a declaration on behalf of his party. He would have done a lot of work behind the scenes to try and get this whole broad movement to the place where they can accept to go back into Stormont. There's a lot here. Everything in Northern Ireland is not just about the bits of negotiation that's in front of them. There's a lot of history there as well. And all of these things come together at moments like this.
Confident?
I'm never going to be overconfident.
Not when it comes to Northern Ireland politics.
But I do want to express just how exciting it will be for the whole of the UK and the island of Ireland if Stormont can get up and running again. It'll be a massive moment, because there was a big, political change at the last elections, which was 3 years ago now, and that meant that Sinn Féin would go in as First Minister, and that means that, of course, with power sharing, they have equal power. But it's a big moment symbolically, and it's completely correct that this is actually expressed by Stormont being up and running, and politics can adapt to these changes.
Any issues as far as Sinn Féin running Stormont is concerned?
Well, what we've seen at the moment, Jeffrey Donaldson has always said that actually the fact that Sinn Féin won in the last Stormont elections was not a barrier. If this happens, then it's a big moment for him because lots of people doubted his word by saying that he would go in as Deputy First Minister. Of course, they have equal power, but there's a symbolism there as well. So we need to make sure that we can get Stormont up and running. It will be a big moment, and let's just hope they can do it. I really, really wish them all the best today and hope they can get across the line.
Minister, in the last hour, Housing Minister said British homes for British people. Is that something that the Labour Party would agree with?
Well, actually, when the last Labour government, we introduced measures that made sure that people who do come here have to have work and then also have to be working for a period of time before they can claim things like housing benefits. So those or housing allowances. So it is right that people who are in areas where there is a real acute challenge with housing know that housing does go to people who are already born and raised in certain communities, because if they believe people are coming in, it can damage the fabric of that community. But let's just be clear about what the real challenge is here. We're not building enough houses. With the Labour government, if we get one in the election this year, we will build 1 million houses very rapidly, because we need to make sure we get back to the fact that we are backing the builders and not always being dragged back by the blockers in the Conservative Party. So that's the fundamental challenge we have here, and we need to get back to that place.
OK, £65,000 is enough for a train driver, says the Minister. Do you agree?
Well, get in the room and negotiate then. I mean, every single one of these, the industrial disputes we've seen, is only ever been solved when the government gets in the room and negotiates. Don't forget Grant Shapps, when he was doing the job 5 jobs ago as Transport Secretary, he refused to meet the train unions.
Yeah, but that was then. This is now.
No, that was then, but then the seeds of acrimony were baked in at that point. We are back.
Mark Harper said that he would be happy to talk to them at any stage, and yet still we find that commuters are in a position where they can't get to work.
Of course, and I represent a community in the city of Brighton and Hove. 35,000 people leave that city every day by train for work. It inflicts so much pain on families and individuals, economic pain for those who need to get to work, but also it impacts communities like the one that I represent in Parliament.
Do you think £65,000 is enough?
I think these things should always be negotiated by unions, the workers and the employers themselves.
Was that a yes or a no?
Both of them should get in, both parties have the duty to get in and negotiate these things. I am not going to decide here and negotiate.
Sounds like a lot of money to me.
Well, you know, £65,000 is more than the average wage. It is a good wage.
Double the average wage.
Yeah, but let's get into the room and make sure that the negotiations should unfold. It's not just about money. Some of this is about terms and conditions as well.
Yeah, but my question is £65,000 enough to
I am not
driving
the
a train?
person that is going to decide who gets paid what right across our public services. These things have to be negotiated. And when negotiations happen in good faith, that is a way of showing respect for workers in our public services, and it's about time this government showed a bit more respect for those people who are working in our public services and keeping our country going.
Tell me about your plan for life sciences, because the government sits there most mornings and says Labour doesn't have a plan.
Oh, we certainly do have a plan for lots of things, certainly economic growth, and now we're launching our plan for life sciences. You know, global exports for life sciences used to be 9%.
What are life sciences?
We used to have life sciences is all of the developments, the scientific developments which impact our human health. So it's medicine, it's vaccines, and all of those things which transform our health. We do so through university research, we do so with pharmaceutical companies in the private sector. When we all work together, we can have huge breakthroughs. Our global share of exports was 9%. 14 years ago. Now it's gone down to 4%. So it shows that we're missing out on all of that potential. Bearing in mind that AstraZeneca alone and their exports account for 2% of our whole exports as a country. We need to get back to that point where we're fully maximising that. We'll do so by setting up a new Office of Regulatory Innovation so we can streamline new innovations that have an impact on health or our economy straight through. We're going to move from 1 to 3 year to 10-year funding so that government funding can be matched by private investment and we can leverage that in a focused way. And we're going to make the NHS a great place for innovation. So innovation can come into the NHS swifter, but crucially, all those blockages that rolled out across the NHS are going to be whittled away by Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary. We're launching the scheme together so that the NHS can make sure that we get the innovations straight there. And for those innovations that are being brought up in Britain, they are being rolled out in the best market that we have, which is the NHS, which benefits the economy, jobs, and also the health of the nation. Bearing in mind, if we get this right, the pharmaceutical companies say that that will create £10 billion worth of investment to the economy and 77,500 jobs created by 2030.
Well, that was comprehensive, wasn't it? No drivel there at all. It's nice to see you as always. Thanks for taking the time. Thank you. So if you are trying to travel around the country today, big issues with the trains. We put it to the Shadow Minister just a few moments ago whether £65,000 was enough to drive a train. He was not getting involved with that, gave it a proper body swerve. When we put it to the Minister, he said that, yes, £65,000 was enough and people should get back to work. Also interesting, when it comes to British homes for British people. Labour seemed to agree with that.
Yeah, that was very interesting, wasn't it? From Peter Carr talking about the measures that were brought in under Gordon Brown, really to going in that very same direction, laying the groundwork for this. But obviously then pointing to the fact that the real challenge here is the shortage of social housing. We know there's more than 1 million people waiting on the waiting list, and insisting, of course, that Labour's going to build more homes because they're not going to accept so many planning objections, amongst other things. But this is a real push from the government today. It's quite an interesting attempt to kind of marry together sounding tough on immigration with housing policy. It's been very criticised by a number of charities who say it's unworkable, it's divisive, it's kind of setting communities against each other with this line, British homes for British workers. But certainly it's not something that the Minister denied when you put it to him earlier.
Indeed.
Fundamentally, with social housing being that finite resource, which I've just talked about, we have to make sure it's used in a way which works and which prioritises people who need it the most, but also people who play by the rules.
OK, so you're further down the list if you're not British or have indefinite leave to remain.
We'll consult, but we are seeking to prioritise out of this, following the consultation.
Is that fair?
Of course it's fair. It's fair that people who've been here for a long time, who have paid into the system, get the access to social housing, which is a precious and finite resource.
But yes, certainly there's a consultation that's going on at the moment. The government have a whole load of measures in terms of cracking down on antisocial behaviour and so on. But it'll be interesting to see whether this really ends up happening in the end, given that social housing is such a finite resource, and how workable it is for councils, and indeed whether or not it's legal, because some charities suggesting it's not really as discriminatory.
For now. Thank you. Still to come on the breakfast programme for you. Could we be called for service if NATO wages war with Russia? We'll discuss the ethics of this and more with two experts after the break. Plus, an iconic musician will host a special concert to raise money for a mental health charity. Stay with us to find out more.
I'm Stuart Ramsey and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
it's really desperate. That is actually the sort of pretty much hopeless column. We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people.
You either live and recover, or you die. OK, so that's like a war.
That's the war.
We help you understand the world with us.
Over the past 24 hours, the soldiers have been attacked on a number of occasions.
It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change.
Take you to the heart of stories that shape our world.
They were convinced the United States would become hooked. Well, they were right.
An enormous explosion has just come down. It's not out of control, but they've withdrawn. It's so hot.
Again, everybody, you're watching The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. House of Lords is what we want to talk to you about this morning. Do let us know your thoughts if you've got a view. Labour, I don't know how long ago, 99, had started to reform the House of Lords. And then we know that Nick Clegg tried to do it a little bit more. And now we're hearing from Keir Starmer, who wants to do away with it altogether.
Yes, indeed. Gordon Brown was actually commissioned by Sir Keir Starmer to do a big constitutional review, trying to help people feel that they had more sort of democratic engagement in the whole system. And his conclusion was that, yeah, we should abolish the whole thing, replace it with a elected regionally representative assembly through proportional representation. Obviously, far fewer members at the moment because it's absolutely vast and quite unwieldy. Interestingly, though, there's also reports that Labour, when they first get into government, might actually be appointing quite a few more lords of their own so that they can get their legislation through more easily before they then go on to say, OK, we're going to totally change it now. But as you say, it's something that whenever parties are actually in government, they find they have other priorities.
Almost 800 of them. 555 of them are men. You can do the maths at home. They get paid £342 every single day they go.
And also not representative in the fact that 6% are from minority background compared to 13% with the average across the UK. A couple of tweets there, someone says it's time to have a referendum on the House of Lords. It should be abolished and replaced with an elected second chamber, a UK Senate. And somebody pointing out that perhaps the Lords just get paid to have lunch and do little else.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting though, isn't it? If you take like the Rwanda legislation, so last night, it's actually the main opposition to the kind of the principle of sending people to the asylum seekers to Rwanda has come from the Lords. It hasn't so much because you've got people like the Archbishop of Canterbury really saying morally this isn't the right thing to do. Even former Chancellor Lord Ken Clarke coming up and saying, you know, this isn't right because Rwanda is effectively a one-party state, kind of opposition we haven't seen otherwise. But at the same time, if it's something that's passed in the House of Commons, then they are going to get it through eventually in the Lord.
I can't remember the name of the Lord that came in, and Laura will remind me, our producer, a black Lord, and he was in the House of Lords library, and two of the other Lords came up to him and asked him whether he could do some photocopying because they thought that he worked there as opposed to being a peer. The name will come to me. What else?
Well, let's bring you some of the day's top stories. Reminder, shall we, of the fact that hardline unionists are protesting after marathon talks. The DUP has agreed a deal with the UK government to restore power sharing to Northern Ireland. Travel chaos looms as several days of train strikes begins today, affecting 8 services. President Biden weighs up US retaliation and Lord Cameron heads back to the Middle East. That's after US soldiers killed in a drone strike in Jordan are named. And farmers across France are continuing their protests, using hundreds of tractors to block key routes into the capital. They want better pay for their produce, less red tape and protection against cheaper imports.
Time now for our big debate. This morning, conscription hasn't been used in the UK for more than 60 years, but comments from top military officials about what could happen if NATO goes to war with Russia have made the possibility of being called up to fight feel closer than it has in generations. Joining us now is Katrina Hodge, who served in both Iraq and Afghanistan after joining the British Army aged 17, and Robert Clark, Director of the Defence and Security Unit at the think tank Civitas. Katrina, to you first of all, why is conscription a good idea?
Joining the army at age 17, it really gave me a sense of purpose and belonging. And when we've got a mental health crisis in the UK, I genuinely think teenagers joining, even doing a year of service, can give them so many transferable skills, that sense of belonging and purpose. And it's time we made Great Britain great again. We've only got to look at the war in Ukraine and how citizens have stepped up to the mark. And I think that's what we need to do here for our defence services.
Robert, make Great Britain great again.
No, I actually share Katrina's sentiments, particularly with regards to my own military service in Iraq and Afghanistan. However, there is a huge difference between an individual's perceptions of military service and the sorts of societal expectations that have shifted in the last, say, 10 or 15 years. We can see sort of the lack of collective societal buy-in, the relative disenfranchisement of, for example, this government, and the idea of national service or conscription is almost, it's anathema to the way of a professional military army. We can see the effect that conscription has had in Ukraine, I absolutely agree, and it's needed. But they're in an existential war for survival. We are not. And if we were to go to war with Russia as part of NATO, we do need the volunteer professional military that we have today, and not sort of a conscription or mass national service base to do so.
A better army, Katrina, if they're volunteers?
I do agree somewhat that obviously if people are volunteers, they're behind it more. But at 17, I didn't really have a direction. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I joined the army really on a bit of a whim. And actually it gave me that sense of purpose and belonging that I needed. And I do think 17, 18-year-olds, it would give them some drive to be in it. And I don't think by just saying we need more numbers, we're going to get more numbers in the armed forces, unfortunately. So I do think something like this could really help. Also, it's not a case of everyone always thinks, oh, national service, we're suddenly going to ship them to war. People would get training. Everyone is a soldier first and foremost in the army, but every job that you can do in civilian street, so being a doctor, being a lawyer, being a musician, you can do in the forces. So not everyone would be shipped out to war as well, which I think is what everyone panics about.
It would be the making of young people, Robert.
Well, it was certainly the making of me as a young 20-year-old, not really knowing my direction either. And it's sort of my military service has led me to where I am today and the man I am today. But like I say, it's not really needed for the military at the moment. What is needed is an increase in defence spending, which people have been lobbying for several years, including the original statements being made by the Chief of the Defence Staff, the Chief of the General Staff, General Sir Patrick Sanders, regarding the need for mobilising society, not necessarily conscription. But in order to do that, we have to rethink the offer and the buy-in for society to join the military. Like I say, society's expectations have shifted in the last sort of 5 to 10 years. And fundamentally, we absolutely have to, number one priority, review and realign our recruitment policies. The awful system under capita are currently around 50% under target. Like I say, it's not conscription the military, and in particular the army, need. It's higher quality candidates and an improved recruitment and fundamentally retention system as well to keep that talent in the army.
Katrina, young people don't want to go to the army.
I don't know why that is. Like this man's just said, I do think there is a recruitment problem in the army that has maybe put people off the process as well. When I joined the army, it was back in 2004. You went to army recruitment offices and you were recruited by people from the army, and they've outsourced that now to civilians. And what I am hearing when I discuss the armed forces with young children that I go and see in schools and things is they try and join, and unfortunately there's barriers along the way and it's very hard to get past that system. So I do agree somewhat that the recruitment process needs to change.
And Robert, forgive me, what would you say to young people? Because we did an interview with Tobias Elwood recently about this, and 2 million people viewed the clip on TikTok. a lot of young people are agitated, shall we say, about the thought that potentially they would have to be conscripted. How would you convince them that it's a good thing to do, Robert?
Well, like Katrina mentioned a moment ago, there's plenty of roles within the military, in the Royal Air Force, the Navy and the Army that aren't just frontline combat. I joined the infantry because I wanted to fight in Iraq and Afghanistan. But the infantry and the combat arms only make up around a third of the Army, and obviously much less in the Navy and the Air Force. So there's plenty of technical trades, technical roles that people can join to serve in. And also what you get out of the military as well in terms of qualifications. I left with an undergraduate degree that set me up for my second career after the military. So there's plenty of opportunities for skilling, retrading, travel, all these sorts of opportunities. And fundamentally, they're the sorts of offers that will help with recruitment and to have that societal buy-in, as opposed to announcing conscription or national service, which just frankly isn't needed and would overwhelm the current system as it is.
OK, good to see you both. Thanks for taking the time. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thanks.
What's happening in Paris? The farmers are up to mischief again. Adam's got more for us. Hi, Adam.
Good morning, Kay. Yeah, we are in Jossigny. Let me tell you, I'm standing in the fast lane of the A4. Paris is in that direction. The Eiffel Tower is 20 miles from us, and of course nothing is moving. Look up there, long line of tractors, combine harvester, and the French flag flying. And this road is blocked by these dozens of tractors. But let me show you what is happening here as French farmers take their protest right to the heart of this country. This enormous barricade made out of hay bales is blocking this motorway, one of a number of motorways that have been blocked today, and more people arriving all the time. And here is the sign that this is not just a flash in the pan. Look at the infrastructure that these farmers have built here on the motorway. They've got food, they've got drink, they've got this marquee set up here in order for them to sustain this protest for the long term. Now, these farmers say that the government has not been listening to them, that the European Union has imposed burdens on them, that they simply, in some cases, cannot make a living, that they have had enough. I submitted 140 demands to the government. There was an emergency meeting of the French cabinet yesterday, and now Gabriel Attal, the Prime Minister, only 34 years old, only been in the job a few weeks, has got to decide how to respond. Now, so far, what you're seeing here is a fairly gentle touch response by the French authorities. They haven't moved on these farmers. They have allowed these blockades to take place. Just look over there, enormous pile of logs placed in the motorway. Nothing is getting through here. You can actually see in the distance there the twinkling lights of the kind of response vehicles. So they're not trying to stop these blockades, but if you go into Paris itself, you can see that there are riot police, there are armoured vehicles, especially outside the big market there. What they want to stop is any kind of escalation of this. But the farmers say that they've had enough of simple, easy words coming from the government, that they need a response, and that if they don't get it, then they're going to increase these protests. More and more farmers arrived last night coming from Alsace. This road is a funnel for so many roads coming from the east of France, and they say if they don't get what they want, they will tighten this blockade and starve Paris.
Goodness, for now. Thank you. North Korea has launched several cruise missiles, according to South Korea. They say the missiles were launched into the sea off its western coast. It's the third launch of its kind this month. Let's get more with Helen Ann. She's in Beijing for us. What's going on, Helen Ann? Morning.
Good morning, Kay. Yes, the South Korean military essentially said they detected the launch of these missiles this morning. Actually, the third time this missile has been tested in the last week. And it's notable because it's a new type of cruise missile that the North Koreans are developing. They say it's the sort of missile that could theoretically be launched from a submarine, and that it's paving the way to sort of advance the technology to actually launch ballistic missiles from submarines that would be very advanced technology. Look, weapons testing is not unusual from North Korea, but it really matters right now because tensions on the Korean Peninsula at the moment are about as high as they've been for many, many years. Not only are there these missile tests, but Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, actually made a really significant speech just last week where he talked about those changing intentions when it comes to South Korea and really, according to some experts, giving indications that he could be taking actual conflict quite seriously. So high tensions here at the moment, a lot of eyes on what he will do next.
OK, thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you this Tuesday morning. An iconic musician will host a special concert to raise money for a mental health charity. You won't want to miss it.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
It's really desperate. That is actually the sort of pretty much hopeless column. We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people.
You either live and recover, or you die. OK, so that's like a war.
That's the war.
We help you understand the world with us.
Over the past 24 hours, the soldiers have been attacked on a number of occasions.
It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change.
Take you to the heart of stories that shape our world.
They were convinced the United States would become hooked. Well, they were right.
An enormous explosion has just come down.
It's not out of control, but they've withdrawn. It's so hot.
Now, one of the founding members of two of Britain's most celebrated bands is hosting a special concert to raise money for a mental health charity. As the basis for both Joy Division and New Order, Peter Hook helped define the sound of Manchester. In the early 80s, he faced the tragedy of losing a bandmate, Ian Curtis, to suicide. Joining us now. Hi, Peter. Great to see you. Thanks for taking the time.
It's a pleasure.
Tell me a bit about the charity and what the work is that you're doing.
Well, over the years, because of what happened to Ian,
We've always managed to get involved in any kind of charities that support young men. I think, as you probably know, that the rate of suicide amongst young men up to the age of 24, 26 is tragically high still. Us men are still very bad at dealing with things and talking about it. So we've used the opportunity that Ian gave us, sadly, to be able to help as much as we can. And to be honest with you, as a musician, just playing at a fundraiser for anything is probably the easiest thing I can do in the world. I'm still very proud of what we've achieved as Joy Division musically. And to me, it's important that even though Ian's not here to share it with us, that we can use his legacy to try and educate and help as many men and women as we can to talk and to get help.
Tell me about the gig.
The gig is very intimate, actually. It's 200 people. It's like going back to the old days. The Star and Garter is a very important venue in Manchester for up-and-coming bands. So, again, it's wonderful to help for that. The picture that Axie has put up on the wall was done by a wonderful guy called Philippe Carley, who's now a great Joy Division documentary. So we've managed to pull all these people in together. We're doing a Q&A. I've got Ian's best friend and the best man at his wedding helping me at the Q&A. I've also got Joy Division's first roadie, who's still my best friend of 45 years, Twinny, to answer some offbeat questions. I mean, people are used to me talking about Joy Division and also used to seeing my face and hearing my story. So I thought to get those two along will make it easier for me, and I'll be able to ask them some interesting questions as well. And in the hope that I lost a very, very close friend to suicide just before Christmas. So I know that the suffering and the still going on, the pain of this, you know, this awful illness. So yeah, anything I can do is a pleasure.
And where's the money going to go?
The money goes to Headstock, all of it. So it's easy for them to work. They've worked very successfully. They've got a lot of awareness in Manchester just by putting Ian up. Ian was first off in Tib Street just for a short period, and he made such an impact. And it was really strange to, on the first day I went at the unveiling and I bumped into Ian's cousin. And oh my God, Ian's cousin, a lovely young lady, looked just like him. So I was flabbergasting for me that you can pull the people that I don't even know his cousin. You know, I've never met her. And so to meet her on that day and see she had Ian's eyes, you know, was absolutely incredible. So yeah, Axie did a great thing and I'm happy. And we've got one in Macclesfield, a picture of Ian right on the high street, which is absolutely wonderful. We've got one in Manchester now, so I'm trying for Salford next.
Okay, very good. Speaking of eyes, I'm loving those glasses. Is one of the frames circular and one square?
It is, and I've got another pair just like it.
It's good to see. What date is the gig?
The date is the 14th of April. It's a ballot for tickets. I'm very excited. We're also playing the first set list that Joy Division ever played as Joy Division. We're featuring two punk songs that we wrote as Joy Division with Ian that have not been played for 40 odd years. So yeah, it's going to be quite an occasion for us. We're also going to do a greatest hits thing. And yeah, as I said about the Q&A, then hopefully if anybody's suffering, they need to get help, just please, everybody is so happy to rally round. And even though with the case with my very close friend last year actually now, it didn't work, but we're hoping that for some people it will work.
Absolutely. Keep in touch and let's chat again before the gig and we'll give it another push if that helps at all. Thanks very much.
Nice to see you.
You too, thank you. I'm glad you're feeling better, thank you. Helpline for Samaritans, of course, on screen now, 116123, or you can email them directly if you'd like to, joe@samaritans.org, 116123. There for you 24/7 if you need them. Now, a High Court judge has ruled actor-turned-politician Laurence Fox liable to people when he referred to them as paedophiles on social media. Fox was sued by former Stonewall trustee Simon Blake and a drag artist, Crystal, over a row on X in October of 2020. Well, Crystal was on the programme this morning and told us why they took him to court.
He's a bully, and accusations of paedophilia against people in the queer community, against drag queens, these are old tropes, and I didn't want to stand for it. I didn't want to let that slide. it honestly felt like if I didn't pursue this to the very end, that it was a tacit admission as well. I needed to see it through and make it clear that there was no basis in fact to this.
Did you find that there was a pile-on after you took Laurence Fox on?
Absolutely. I mean, the day he called me a paedophile, I received dozens of horrible, horrible messages. There's not enough bullets in the world. Things like this. Horrible things to read. And that hasn't stopped in the 3 years since. You know, there have been flare-ups ever since. If I write an article for the Metro about how drag can be appropriate for children, it happens again. And his was the first time that ever happened to me, but it hasn't stopped since. And I really hope that this judgment goes some way to reminding people that using those words is defamatory and there will be consequences.
And a longer clip from Crystal will be online a little bit later on. You can check out our social media feeds as well if you'd like to. We also want to talk about something that Elon Musk is up to. It doesn't relate to Twitter or X. What does it relate to? Wilfred is with us. Hi, Wilfred. Good morning.
Hey, very good morning to you all. It relates to one of his latest startups that he's behind, Neuralink, which is making human brain implants, basically to try and enhance brain functionality and performance. And the FDA approved his ability to make human tests, to begin human tests last year. They've just had the results of the first one, and he said the results were, quote, promising. And he said they've called it telepathy, this product. And initially, the aim is to help you control your phone just simply by your thoughts. And that is targeted initially to those who may have lost their limbs. Of course, where this sort of technology might go down the line is what is both, I don't know, depending on your view, very exciting or quite scary.
What do you think?
I think a little bit of both, but I was just watching a video from 2023 of a man from the Netherlands who was treated by a Swiss clinic, who had an implant put into his brain and then communicated to one in his spine, and he was able to walk again. So from my perspective, you know, for people in those kind of positions, this must be an incredible prospect.
It's incredible hope, isn't it? And for people who can't communicate, locked-in syndrome, all of that, if you're actually able to directly connect with the device that will tell people what you want to do, to think, to say, I mean, incredible. But also, I think it's amazing it's being called telepathy, because it's kind of got this idea that for everyone else, could you call someone and speak to them just through your mind to mind? I mean, extraordinary.
OK. Obviously, more on that with Wilfred from 10 o'clock. This morning, apparently it's going to cost, he has invested something like $56 billion so far. That's a lot of money, isn't it? We are back with all today's top stories in a second. Hello everybody, very good morning to you. It's 9 o'clock. Coming up on the programme for you, talking about the DUP's deal with the UK government, which tells us it's tentatively good news.
Plus, we're debating another political hot potato this morning. Is the House of Lords too full? And British houses for British people. We've explored that with the government minister too.
Plus, why French farmers have converged on Paris to blockade the capital with hundreds of tractors.
You know why we gave you that, Dick?
Yes, former farmer.
There you go. Tuesday, 30th of January.
Honour your word. Honour your word.
Hardline unionists protest, but after marathon talks, the DUP agrees a deal with the UK government to restore power sharing to Northern Ireland.
I believe that my party has acted decisively based upon the proposals that are before us.
Train pain and cancellations as drivers walk out in an ongoing dispute over pay. We put it to the minister.
People just want to get on with getting to work, and the union should just stop and call the strike on.
Is £65,000 enough for driving trains?
Yes.
A pivotal moment as the US soldiers killed in a drone strike are named. Joe Biden weighs up US retaliation, and Lord Cameron heads back to the Middle East. Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan is handed a 10-year jail term for leaking state secrets. Telepathy is real. We'll reveal Elon Musk's latest brainchild, giving a human a computer brain implant. We hear from the drag queen who successfully sued Laurence Fox about why they took him to court.
These are old tropes, and I didn't want to stand for it. I didn't want to let that slide. It honestly felt like if I didn't pursue this to the very end, that it was a tacit admission.
Morning, thanks for joining us on The Breakfast Show here on Sky News Tuesday morning. Our top story for you in the breaking news you're waking up to, well, you probably have been awake a while now. The DUP has agreed a deal to return to power sharing in Northern Ireland, subject to legislation to be put forward by the UK government. The government minister told this programme it's tentatively good news. Power sharing collapsed nearly 2 years ago when the party protested against post-Brexit trade arrangements. Our senior Ireland correspondent David Blevins reports from Belfast.
There were protests outside the meeting.
Honour your word. Honour your word.
And an activist opposed to any compromise was live tweeting from a source inside. But the Democratic Unionist leader emerged from his party executive, having won support for his deal with the UK government.
The package of measures in totality does provide a basis for our party to nominate members to the Northern Ireland Executive, thus seeing the restoration of the locally elected institutions.
It's 2 years since the DUP ended power sharing at Stormont in opposition to the Brexit border in the Irish Sea. But the government has pledged to table legislation to address unionist concerns over Northern Ireland's place in the United Kingdom. That's not enough for hardline unionists who accuse the DUP of selling out and letting the UK government off the hook.
Well, it is the job of the British government to make sure its borders are secure and that the union remains intact. And it's not doing that. So the first thing we must do is get rid of this Tory traitor government.
It's just unbelievable the way things have panned out. But we need good leadership, and we don't have it from the British government or from our own people.
The DUP held the meeting behind closed doors, but a prominent loyalist went viral by posting a running commentary.
The protests outside were predictable, but no one could have anticipated details of this highly confidential meeting being live tweeted from inside, an indication of the divisions within unionism and the challenges faced by Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
He has faced down his critics within and without to restore the power sharing at the heart of the peace process. David Blevins, Sky News in County Down.
Stephen joining us live from Stormont. So what happens next, Stephen?
Well, the timelines have still to be worked out, but since we last spoke, Kay, Jeffrey Donaldson has been speaking to the radio programme Good Morning Ulster, and he has said that he does expect details of the deal and details of the required legislation to be published by London by tomorrow, hopefully. So that will give you an indication of the haste with which this will be pursued. We could see then in the coming days, possibly by the end of the week, there's speculation that maybe it will go even over the weekend. We could see the local politicians returning here to Stormont, which is laying idle for the last 2 years, of course. They will, first of all, have to elect a Speaker for the new Northern Ireland Assembly, and then a First Minister and Deputy First Minister will be elected. The First Minister, of course, will be Sinn Féin's Michelle O'Neill. A historic moment here in Northern Ireland. For the very first time, we will see a nationalist First Minister. And Jeffrey Donaldson, as well as the other politicians here in Northern Ireland, have also been calling upon the Secretary of State, Chris Heaton-Harris, to immediately release the package, the financial package, £3.3 billion, which was dependent on the return of Stormont and includes around £600 million to try and deal with the public sector pay issues here in Northern Ireland. They're calling on him to release that funding immediately as a goodwill gesture. So it should be a matter of days, not weeks, before we hopefully will see the restoration of devolved government here in Northern Ireland.
OK, for now, thank you. Well, earlier I spoke to the former Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary, Peter Kyle, about what elephant traps may be in place following the DUP's decision to end its 2-year boycott of Stormont. Trust me, we put the lights on, we'll put another 50p in that meter and you'll be hearing from Peter Kyle very shortly. In the meantime, let's bring in Amanda, should we? He was, like the government is, cautiously optimistic.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, he talked about the huge excitement it would mean for the UK and Ireland to get Stormont back up and running again, but also made the point we've been very close to deals before, only to see them fail at the last hurdle. So he said he's never overconfident when dealing with the situation in Northern Ireland, but praised the leadership being shown by Sir Jeffrey Donaldson to get it to this point. And as you say, the government as well, not wanting to be too definite about this. Chris Heaton-Harris, the Northern Ireland Secretary, saying that it was a welcome and significant step, what he had heard from the DUP. He tweeted that this morning, absolutely, and saying they want to try and finalise it as soon as possible.
OK, for now, Amanda, thank you. Let's talk about the former Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan has been sentenced to 10 years in prison for leaking state secrets. What's all that about? Cordelia standing by for us. Hi, Cordelia, sentenced to 10 years in jail?
Good morning, Kay. Yes, the former Prime Minister sentenced to 10 years, as you say, found guilty of revealing state secrets. This relates to the so-called Cypher case. He's accused of leaking a diplomatic cable. He has said that it was evidence of a conspiracy between the Pakistani military and the US government. Now, his team has said that this sentencing today is a sham case, that they are going to fight it and that it was delivered in haste. It is definitely, though, a big blow for him. He already was serving a 3-year sentence in a corruption case. He faces, Kay, more than 150 cases which are pending, which include contempt of court, terrorism and inciting violence. And his 10-year sentence today comes just 10 days before Pakistan's parliamentary elections. Now, the Independent Human Rights Commission has expressed concern about those elections, Kay. It says there's little chance they'll be free and fair. Also worried that Khan was stopped from standing. Now, he retains a really strong grassroots support. Many of his supporters attracted to his anti-establishment rhetoric. But his team, who hoped that he might be able to make it out, well, it looks very unlikely now.
OK, for now, thank you. Rest of the news now. Gareth's joined us.
Yes, the first train strikes of the year start today and will last early until next week. But today, many of the busiest commuter routes are crippled, with 8 services affected as both ASLEF and the RMT unions go on strike over pay. The South and London will be hit hardest. South Eastern, Gatwick Express and Greater Northern will have no service. There's a reduced service on South Eastern and South Western lines, including the Island line. And Thameslink is running a severely reduced shuttle service which will travel between London St Pancras and Luton only. Last month, the Transport Minister said a £65,000 offer was on the table for ASLEF drivers, which their General Secretary, Mick Whelan, says he's happy to meet. So, Kay asked the Government Minister this morning, why is all this still going on?
Well, the unions, in my view, don't need to be on strike. They're impacting my constituents in North East Derbyshire right now who want to get to work, and they shouldn't be doing that. I don't know why they're striking. I wish they weren't. This is a very long-standing dispute. People just want to get on with getting to work, and the unions should just stop and call the strike on.
Is £65,000 enough for driving trains?
Yes.
Well, Amelia is at Waterloo Station this morning. How are things hit there, Amelia?
Well, passengers certainly this morning are not enjoying dealing with yet fresh strikes. But what I've observed is that Waterloo is generally today quieter than it would normally be. But there are sudden influxes of a large number of people, which says to me that the trains that are arriving are a lot more busy than normal. This is the start of nearly a week's worth of strikes at England's national rail operators. It's being put on by ASLEF, that's the drivers' union, in an ever-increasing and bitter row over pay and conditions. And, Gareth, it coincides with a 9-day overtime ban that started yesterday. South Western, which runs trains out of Waterloo, says only travel if absolutely necessary. But what's interesting is that this today was supposed to be the first test of the government's new minimum service legislation. They brought that in November last year. And what that would have done would have been allowing train companies to mandate, to say to staff, no, you must come in and work so that we can maintain a service level of 40%. LNER had originally said it would, but then after new threats from ASLEF about 5 days' worth of strikes, they said that they wouldn't. So look, it's a busy day for commuters, lots of board checking here this morning.
Amelia, thank you. More details of the routes affected on the Sky News app. Joe Biden's weighing up retaliation to the drone strike by Iranian-backed militants, which killed 3 US soldiers at a base known as Tower 22 in Jordan. More details have emerged about the attack, which reports that the air defence system was switched off to allow an American drone to return to base. The Pentagon says the strike came from Kataib Hezbollah, thought to be loyal to and funded by Iran. For its part, Tehran has denied any involvement. The question today is, what will Biden's next steps be?
And the President's been crystal clear. We will respond decisively to any aggression. And we will hold responsible the people who attacked our troops. We'll do so at a time and a place of our choosing.
Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, has this update from the Jordanian capital, Amman.
Joe Biden would have been given a range of options by Pentagon planners, ranging from the symbolic to the severely punitive. And he's got to find one that works in the sense of it restores American deterrence, because doing nothing, not doing enough is dangerous in this region. Weakness could encourage your enemies to do worse. But also he can't risk tipping the region into a major Middle Eastern war. We've been saying for some time now that the Iranians don't seem to want that and the Americans don't want it, but there's always the risk of miscalculation leading to escalation and this turning into a much bigger regional conflict. And we've also seen this deadly game of brinkmanship between Iranian-backed groups like Hezbollah, with Israel over the northern border exchanging artillery fire, and the Houthi rebels in Yemen directly taking on American and British navies, and then more than 150 attacks on American bases in Iraq, Syria and Jordan. And any one of those fault lines has the potential to become much bigger. And with this attack on this American base that killed 3 American soldiers, the Iranian-backed militia certainly raised the stakes. So the danger now is that Joe Biden ups the ante himself, overreacts, and then leaves Iran in a position where it can't do anything but escalate things further. It is a nerve-wracking moment for the Middle East.
The wreckage of Amelia Earhart's plane may have finally been discovered. Scans taken by Deep Sea Vision show what they think is the long-lost wreckage at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. She was the first female aviator to cross the Atlantic solo before disappearing on a round-the-world attempt. 5 people in the UK are believed to have developed Alzheimer's disease as a result of medical treatment decades earlier. Research pointed to a rogue protein that causes the form of dementia, taken from the brains of deceased people and given to children. The same protein is now produced synthetically. A woman has been seriously injured in a shark attack in Sydney Harbour. She was bitten on her right leg by what's thought to have been a bull shark during a swim on Monday evening. Shark attacks in Sydney Harbour in Australia are rare, but the area is known as a key habitat for bull sharks and their young.
Other news, the Bank of England have fined HSBC Bank almost £60 million. Why? Ian's with us. Morning, Ian.
Hello, Kay. Yes, that's right. This relates to what's known as the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, which is the scheme which protects depositors' money in the event of a bank failing. Everyone is entitled to their first £85,000 worth of deposits being underwritten by the taxpayers should a lender go bust. Now, what the Prudential Regulation Authority of the Bank of England has said here is that HSBC failed to identify which deposits were eligible for protection under that scheme in 99% of cases over a period that went from 2015 until 2022. Also failed to have a senior manager responsible for overseeing the situation, and it says that HSBC for some 15 months in that period was not forthcoming with it in terms of providing all the information that the regulator required. Accordingly, it's fined HSBC £57.4 million. It's the second largest fine levied by the PRA. The record was in July last year when it hit the now defunct Credit Suisse with an £87 million penalty.
OK, don't forget, Ian live at 11:30 and 4:30 this afternoon. Thanks, Ian. Farmers in France attempting to blockade Paris, and it's all kicking off, isn't it, Adam? Morning.
Good morning. Yes, it is, and it has just expanded in the past few minutes. If you look behind me, you see this long, long line of tractors, and these have arrived over the past 10 minutes or so. Now, we've spoken to some of these farmers as they have arrived this morning. They tell us they've driven from out in the far east of France, from the Moselle area. Actually, some of them coming from very near the border with Germany. And I spoke to a young man called Antoine who said he'd driven for 320 kilometres. These things don't go fast. He reckoned he was doing about 40 kilometres an hour, and he said it broke his heart to have to do this. But why? Because this is part of an enormous series of protests around the whole of Paris at the moment. These protests, of course, have been going on around France, but right now the purpose is clear, and that is to create chokeholds on the capital, to put pressure on the French government, and I have to say particularly the young Prime Minister, Gabriel Attal, just 34 years old, few weeks in the job. I think these farmers think that now is the chance to impress on the leadership, that they feel that they've been left behind, that they don't earn enough money, that they are burdened down by regulations. They've given him 140 demands. Today, Attal will announce what his response will be. If these farmers aren't happy, they will push further towards Paris.
Can you imagine, Adam, a driver of that tractor driving 300 miles and being stuck behind him all the way? It's just a thought.
I mean, but you wouldn't just be behind him. You'd be behind all of these people. I have to say, it is an extraordinary sight when you see all of these vehicles trundling along, and rather incongruously, they were all using their horns to beat Baby Shark as they came to a halt. I've never seen anything like it, Kate.
Thanks very much indeed, Adam. Thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show here on Sky News Tuesday morning. Train drivers begin their first day of new strike action in their long-running row over pay. Talking to ASLEF's General Secretary about the impact.
My very first memory of the violin is actually from my grandmother, and is when I was 3 years old. She showed me what a violin was, and it was a real discovery for me. And I think that's what sparked it. She transmitted something to me, I think, without saying much. My grandmother was living in the northeast of France with her parents, and so she played the violin, and she'd kept this little small violin, and she'd hang it on her bedroom wall. And when Germany invaded France, they wanted to try to escape to the free zone, so they tried to go to the south and ended up in a city called Perpignan. However, when you had to escape, you had to be very careful if the neighbours would know about it or people would know about it because they could snitch on you. So my great-grandfather decided to stay in the house whilst my grandmother and her mother would escape and do as if everything was fine. So so they escaped. My great-grandfather stayed. When the French police came, the milice, they actually beat him nearly to death. But he was actually still alive and managed, thankfully, to join them after. They completely sacked the house. And the incredible thing is that when they came back, a few years later, they came back to the house. It was completely empty. There was just broken things on the floor. But there was something quite magical, is that the small little violin was just in the middle of the living room, just intact. And that was the only thing that wasn't broken. And I know she didn't like talking about it because of how traumatic it was. However, I believe it's so important that we share those stories, because I think history, being told in a history book is something, but when you hear history from people who've actually lived it, it just takes a whole other dimension.
Again, everybody, you just saw us there, didn't you? We're here as well. A High Court judge has ruled the actor-turned-politician Laurence Fox liable to people when he referred to them as paedophiles on social media. Fox was sued by former Stonewall trustee Simon Blake and drag artist Crystal over a row on X in October of 2020. Crystal was on the programme this morning and told us why they took him to court.
He's a bully, and accusations of paedophilia against people in the queer community, against drag queens, these are old tropes, and I didn't want to stand for it. I didn't want to let that slide. It honestly felt like if I didn't pursue this to the very end, that it was a tacit admission as well. I needed to see it through and make it clear that there was no basis in fact to this.
Did you find that there was a pile-on after you took Laurence Fox on?
Absolutely. I mean, the day he called me a paedophile, I received dozens of horrible messages. There's not enough bullets in the world, things like this. Horrible things to read. And that hasn't stopped in the 3 years since. There have been flare-ups ever since. If I write an article for the Metro about how drag can be appropriate for children, it happens again. And his was the first time that ever happened to me, but it hasn't stopped since. And I really hope that this judgment goes some way to reminding people that using those words is defamatory and there will be consequences.
Other news, North Korea has launched several cruise missiles, according to South Korea. They say the missiles were launched into the sea off its western coast. It's the third launch of its kind this month. Helen Ann Smith has the latest from Beijing.
The South Korean military essentially said they detected the launch of these missiles this morning. Actually, the third time this missile has been tested in the last week. And it's notable because it's a new type of cruise missile that the North Koreans are developing. They say it's the sort of missile that could theoretically be launched from a submarine, and that it's paving the way to sort of advance the technology to actually launch ballistic missiles from submarines that would be very advanced technology. Look, weapons testing is not unusual from North Korea, but it really matters right now because tensions on the Korean Peninsula at the moment are about as high as they've been for many years. Not only are there these missile tests, But Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, actually made a really significant speech just last week where he talked about those changing intentions when it comes to South Korea and really, according to some experts, giving indications that he could be taking actual conflict quite seriously. So high tensions here at the moment, a lot of eyes on what he will do next.
Looking at the weather for you now here on Sky.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
An improving picture today over many places as the sunshine spreads south and east. We're currently seeing lots of cloudy grey weather over many parts of England and Wales, and there are also a few spots of drizzle around as well. But across Scotland, Ireland and Northern Ireland, it's cold but sunny with a widespread frost. The cloudy weather will slowly edge eastwards during the day, allowing the sunshine to spread across northern England, Wales and southwest England.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Still to come on The Breakfast Show. Is the House of Lords too overcrowded? We'll hear from two peers about whether reform is needed. Hello again, everybody. You're watching The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Sam has joined us. He's got some intel on what's going on as far as Stormont is concerned. Looking forward to hearing more. Before that, the headlines.
I've got all the top stories. Yes, hardline unionists protest, but after the marathon talks, the DUP has agreed a deal with the UK government to restore power sharing to Northern Ireland. More on that in a second. Travel chaos looms as several days of train strikes begin today, affecting 8 services. President Biden weighs up US retaliation and Lord Cameron heads back to the Middle East after US soldiers killed in a drone strike are named. Farmers across France are continuing their protests, using hundreds of tractors to block key routes into the capital. They want better pay for their produce, less red tape and protection against cheaper imports.
As promised, Sam is here, our Deputy Political Editor. So, I was talking to UK Minister, Westminster politicians this morning, and they were both cautiously optimistic. Neither of them were rolling out the red carpet for this deal just yet.
Yeah, because you look at the public statements overnight from the Secretary of State and Chris Heaton-Harris, and they strike a slightly more jubilant note than I think is the reality inside government. I'm picking up a lot of nerves, Kay, about what happens next.
Why?
Yes, the DUP executive voted to approve what's going on, but they worry inside government that it is simply an approval to the next stage, because the biggie is seeing the letter of the legislation. Now, I was in contact with the Cabinet Minister. Actually, there's a Cabinet in a couple of hours. I expect quite possibly the Cabinet to be shown some of the legal text. That's legal text that the people in that room last night that David Blevins were covering didn't see. And that's quite a big and important thing. Because when you take a step back, the British government are trying something quite hard here. They are trying to tell the DUP that something has changed about the way that Great Britain relates to Northern Ireland and that they're getting rid of checks. They're trying to tell the European Union that nothing has changed, and they're trying to tell the Brexiteers that everything is fine and this isn't going to reflect the UK's ability to embrace Brexit freedoms in the years to come. Not all those three things can be true, and everybody inside government knows it. So it's going to come down to the legal text and possible interpretations in a court of what that legal text says. So the view of some in government is the hardest bit may yet to come. Just because they said yes last night does not guarantee you success in Stormont reforming.
OK, so they need David Blaine. We've got David Blevins at 9:45. Thank you. It's not just thrown together. We'll see you shortly.
Magic.
Thank you, Sam. I also want to talk about the House of Lords. Should it be reformed? That is the big question. Is it too unwieldy? Almost 800 peers in the House of Lords at the moment. It's the second biggest legislative chamber in the world after China. We're hearing from Keir Starmer. He's asked Gordon Brown to do a piece of work, and that is suggesting that it should be replaced with an Assembly of Nations, 200 members. How would they be chosen? What sort of term would they stand? Where would they sit? All of the above. Let's ask Lord Robathan and also Lord Norton. Gentlemen, it's good to see you both.
Morning.
Thank you for joining us on the programme. You're outdated and you need to be reformed, apparently.
Well, we're very outdated, you can tell that. I think the answer to reform most certainly doesn't come from Gordon Brown. And I mean, come on, let's look at his record. And all he wants is more devolution, whilst the SNP and well, actually, they're not doing very well, but the SNP beaver away. So I don't think we need reform from Gordon Brown. What do we need? Well, I think Philip will have his own views on this. First of all, although there's a ridiculous number of members, an awful lot of them don't turn up.
Nearly 800.
Yeah, but you probably see up to 450, 500 max, ever. A lot of people treat it as an honour.
Got the title. Yeah.
But you've got the title, exactly. So I'm my lord and all that sort of stuff. I think there are scope. I mean, we've had some pretty embarrassing appointments recently. I mean, Lord Lebedev, who I'm sure is a thoroughly nice man.
Evgeny Lebedev, who used to own the Evening Standard.
Indeed.
And Boris Johnson went down to his father's house in southern Italy.
And stayed with him on holiday. And I'm not sure that's a good reason. Let's not be personal.
Can we tiptoe through the raindrops here? Yeah. Because, you know, he's got a lot of money. He can easily sue you and us.
Well, he can sue me if he wants. He can sue me if he wants. I doubt he will.
Something inappropriate.
I won't say anything
we're
inappropriate.
Not going to.
But the point is, it has to be people that care about I'm sure he does, care about this country, care about the Constitution, care about the legislation. We're unappointed, we're unaccountable. Sorry, we're appointed, we're unaccountable. And that's a weakness. However, most people take their responsibilities pretty seriously.
Sitting and waiting patiently. Lord Norton, your thoughts?
Well, my first point is, let's start from first principles. What's the second chamber for? Well, my view is that, fundamentally, good law is a public good. So what the Lords is about ensuring that this law is as good as it can be. I think we fulfil a vital role as a complementary second chamber. The House of Lords enjoys primacy, it's elected, it can determine the ends of legislation, but MPs are extremely busy. The demands on them now means they've got to prioritise, they don't look in detail at legislation. That's left to us. We don't challenge the principle. The Commons determine the ends of legislation. We focus on the means. We're very good at that. It takes a lot of time, effort. We've got the people. On the whole, people are there because of their experience or their expertise. It's the exceptions that make the news. But those who are there getting on with the work of the House because they understand the subject, they've experienced it, or they're top of their profession in law, medicine, environment, science, whatever, can contribute to make sure it's good law to complement what the Commons is doing. So that's the value of it. And when you look at things like the Brown Commission, when you look at when the government tried to reform the Lords in 2012, it begins from the premise what the Lords does is actually worthwhile. It's good work. We don't want the functions to change. Well, of course, if you change the composition, it affects how you can fulfil the functions, but there's that disconnect. And of course, even the Brown Commission, read it, it says how good the current Lords is. It says the committees do great work. You've got that experience and expertise. So it's important to capture that. Too much of the debate about Lords reform is about composition. It's not about the role of the second chamber. So you're putting the horse before the cart. What's the second chamber there to do? Once you've decided that, you decide who should be in it to carry out the task that people expect it to carry out. And I think that's the fundamental approach we should be taking.
Well, Philip's put it much better than I can, frankly, but I think he's absolutely right. I was an MP for 23 years. If you're a government MP, you are told not to say anything on committees because the government just wants to push stuff through. It's not until it gets to the House of Lords when people examine in detail the legislation that comes forward and actually very often improve things dramatically. And going back to what he was saying also about composition, you have some really excellent people there. You have some not so excellent people there, and I'll put myself somewhere in the soggy middle. But you have some really excellent, interesting, authoritative people there who are worth going to listen to just for themselves. I could list lots, but we're not being personal now. And in all sorts of fields, the law, of course, but other things. I may disagree with them very often, but at least you have people who have some opinions and know what they're talking about, whereas, frankly, in the Commons, very often people don't know very much.
Yeah, and I think the point to make is we're not against reform of the existing House to strengthen it in fulfilling the functions I've mentioned. So picking up a point about size, at the end of 2016, we passed a motion unanimously saying the House was too large, steps should be taken to reduce the number. We think we should be no bigger than the House of Commons. We're in favour of ensuring no
That's
one
only
party...
150 less than you are at the moment.
Yes.
So that's what you're thinking, 650?
Yes, less. Fewer than 650 would be ideal. We probably need a largest membership because so many of the members have expertise that is current. They're outside doing their jobs. They come in and provide that information. But we should be slimmed down. We're all in favour of that. We think the appointments process can be strengthened. We know trust in the appointments process means a lot to people outside. We've got survey evidence for that. I introduced a bill at the end of 2022 to change the appointments process, to enhance it, to ensure that the people came in met a threshold of conspicuous merit. So we're in favour of change. It's the government not providing the time to get the measures through, because I introduced a bill at the end of 2022 to reform the process. Overwhelming support in the House for it. It's a case of finding time to get it through. So we favour change from within to strengthen the House in doing what it does.
What about those that don't? You said, maybe 200-300 of them just don't come at any stage. Should they just be, that's it?
Well, I don't think it really matters, actually, since they don't play a particular role in it. But you see, Philip's absolutely right. There's lots of things that can be improved. But if you start tinkering with the whole setup and everybody come back and say, well, let's have an elected second chamber. Well, you have an elected second chamber, immediately it gets an authority, which we don't have, and will challenge the House of Commons. Whatever safeguards put in, it will challenge the House of Commons in a different way. And I don't think that's right.
As well. I know
Sorry?
you do that as well. I know
well,
that I know you don't, but you probably may do after November or whenever the election
Could be.
But we challenge on the detail of
exactly.
legislation. We send it back to the Commons. If the Commons insist, the Commons gets its way.
Yes.
That's the fundamental point. If we're elected, if the House was elected, those in it would be able to use the existing powers in a way we choose not to use, and of course would probably demand more on the grounds whatever electoral system you use. They'd probably say, well, it's even more legitimate than the Commons. So the danger is you'd get deals done between the two chambers, which the decision-making process tend to become rather opaque. Fundamentally to our political system, there'd then be no one body that is answerable for public policy because it is spread between the chambers. At the moment, we've got one body, the party in government, answerable for public policy. The electors know that, they put it in place, they can remove it at the next election. That's the body responsible. Divide responsibility. Who do you hold to account?
My lords, we are out of time. Fascinating stuff, as always. Great to see you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. The train drivers are on strike. We'll be talking to the man who wants them to have more money and what else. Stay tuned and find out.
My very first memory of the violin is actually from my grandmother, and is when I was 3 years old. She showed me what a violin was, and it was a real discovery for me. And I think that's what sparked it. She transmitted something to me, I think, without saying much. My grandmother was living in the northeast of France with her parents, and so she played the violin, and she'd kept this little small violin, and she'd hang it on her bedroom wall. And when Germany invaded France, they wanted to try to escape to the free zone, so they tried to go to the south and ended up in a city called Perpignan. However, when you had to escape, you had to be very careful if the neighbours would know about it or people would know about it because they could snitch on you. So my great-grandfather decided to stay in the house whilst my grandmother and her mother would escape and do as if everything was fine. So they escaped. My great-grandfather stayed. When the French police came, the militia, they actually beat him nearly to death. But he was actually still alive and managed, thankfully, to join them after. They completely sacked the house. And the incredible thing is that when they came back, a few years later, they came back to the house, it was completely empty. There was just broken things on the floor. But there was something quite magical, is that the small little violin was just in the middle of the living room, just intact. And that was the only thing that wasn't broken. And I know she didn't like talking about it because of how traumatic it was. However, I believe it's so important that we share those stories, because I think history, being told in a history book is something, but when you hear history from people who've actually lived it, it just takes a whole other dimension.
Slightly minutes, slightly better. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Hello again, everybody. Travel chaos yet again. Strikes bringing our railways to a halt once more. Why now? Let's bring in Mick Whelan, General Secretary of ASLEF. Hi, Mick. Always great to see you. Thanks for taking the time. What's going on?
Well, quite simply, Kay, we're still in the same position as the last time I spoke to you. Some of my members have gone 5 years without a pay deal. We're 18 months into strike action. And once we're on strike to promote our cause, and so the government hopefully at some point will come to the table.
I thought you'd been offered £65,000 for rail drivers, and that the government were going to talk to you about it. Did that not happen?
No. As you know, we've had 2 deals that were done in bad faith. One, strangely up about the anniversary of it, where they put a deal out via the press that we had never seen and never negotiated, that we gave up every term and condition, every local agreement, and took a massive pay cut and gave up the right to negotiate in future, which we then rejected. We then went back to the table after that bad faith and spent a month doing a deal, taking the red lines out, which at the last minute they put the red lines in. And then after we'd left the room on their final offer, they changed the final offer overnight and told us by text, which we rejected. They know that we've got a process with them that we cannot put out deals that we reject or not recommended by our executive committee, and we haven't seen them since.
OK, so just to clarify, back in December, the Transport Secretary said an offer of £65,000 had been made if you were willing to get round the table. What happened to that?
Well, I would love him to offer my members £65,000. I've got members in many companies on far less than that, and the government's own figures say the average train driver's on less than that.
So that didn't happen?
No. What they did was put a deal out that we'd never seen, wanting to rip up every term and condition we had for a less than RPI pay cut. These people do not tell the truth. They dissemble on a daily basis, and maybe that's why they've been in hiding for the last 12 months.
OK. Would £65,000 a year be enough?
Well, that'd be down to the people that have to do it, and what depends what you have to do for it. What they were proposing was unacceptable.
I chatted to the Minister, actually, earlier. I don't know if you'll be able to hear this, Mick, but just have a listen, because I did say to him, is £65,000 enough for train drivers?
Well, the unions, in my view, don't need to be on strike. They're impacting my constituents in North East Derbyshire right now who want to get to work, and they shouldn't be doing that. I don't know why they're striking. I wish they weren't. This is a very long-standing dispute. People just want to get on with getting to work, and the unions should just stop and call the strike on.
Is £65,000 enough for driving trains?
Yes.
So the Minister's saying, doesn't know why you're on strike, get back to work.
Well, I was at great pains from the one and only time I met him to explain what the problem was. And actually, we don't work for the government. I keep telling people we work for the privateers that they contract, who, as we all know, are making hundreds of millions of pounds, declaring massive dividends to their shareholders and boasting in their management meetings about the free money they're getting from the government. We also see the government criticising the executives in the rail industry for their high pay, yet the people who actually do the work haven't had a pay rise for half a decade. Maybe if the Minister will come and talk to us, he might understand why we're on strike.
Are you abiding, is ASLEF abiding by minimum service levels?
There are no minimum service levels. Quite simply, we responded to both consultations, the Department of Business and the Department of DFT. The government's own impact assessment said it would lead to more strife. The one company that tried to do it, we then responded with that more strife to have the same impact with our industrial action as we would have normally, and they withdrew. I mean, I think it's staying on the character of the
Just to clarify there, Mick, are you actually abiding by the minimum service levels, which is now a legal requirement, of course, of 40% of normal service during strike days?
It's up to the employers if they want to bring in minimum service levels. No employer has.
So you're not?
It's not for us to abide by anything. We have not been consulted on the introduction of minimum service levels. There is a process where they would have to consult with us. No one can tell us how to do it safely. One operator told me it would take 90% of staff to operate 40% of minimum services, and you don't have 90% available on a 3-shift, 7-day-week system currently.
Our understanding is that those 18 train operators, most of them are saying that if there was another series of strikes after these, that they would implement the minimum service levels legal requirement.
And if they do, and they consult and show us how it can be done safely, we would have to abide by that legislation. But it would have the commensurate knock-on effect of introducing further strife.
Good to talk to you, Mick Whelan. As always, thanks very much indeed for taking the time. Thanks.
Thank you, Kay.
Now, let me talk to you about what's happening in Northern Ireland. The Democratic Unionist Party has agreed a deal to restore power sharing to Northern Ireland, subject to legislation by the UK government. The party collapsed the power sharing government nearly 2 years ago in protest against post-Brexit trade arrangements. Should we get
more on that now. And our senior Ireland correspondent, David Blevins, is joining us. Hi, David. It's always great to see you. I know you had a late night, so we appreciate you taking the time this morning, getting up early for us. Is the deal done?
Yes, I think the deal's done, but we haven't seen the detail yet, Kay. We understand the UK government will publish that tomorrow, but despite having not seen the detail, the DUP leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, has made some very big claims about what is in that agreement. He says the agreement his party has done with the UK government will end EU law automatically applying in Northern Ireland. That's really to address the big sovereignty concern about Northern Ireland firmly remaining part of the United Kingdom. He also claims that the agreement will result in, and I quote, zero checks on goods moving from Great Britain into Northern Ireland and remaining in Northern Ireland. Now that seems quite a departure from the Windsor framework, the deal that Rishi Sunak did with the EU 11 months ago. So when the deal is published tomorrow, I think we'll be looking for two things. To see if the UK government has reneged on some of the commitments it made to the EU in that Windsor framework in order to get power sharing restored in Northern Ireland. And secondly, we'll be looking to see if Rishi Sunak has reneged on any commitments to the Eurosceptics within his own party. In other words, is Brexit still Brexit, or has he softened his line on that again in order to get power sharing restored in Northern Ireland? It's a very well-worn cliche, but the devil really will be in the detail.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Given what you're saying, and the deal is done, and there won't be any checks whatsoever, has Rishi Sunak got Brexit done?
Well, Boris Johnson would tell you that he was the person who got Brexit done. But of course, Boris Johnson is the person that the DUP feels most betrayed by, because 1 year before he did the deal with the EU to impose a trade border in the Irish Sea between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, he stood on the platform at the DUP annual conference here in Belfast and said no British Prime Minister could ever countenance a deal that would result in a trade border in the Irish Sea between Great Britain in Northern Ireland. Ultimately, the DUP made all sorts of attempts to have that border removed, but were not successful, and became so frustrated to the point where they felt the only way to make their voice heard was to pull out of power sharing here, to end the political administration at the heart of the Good Friday Agreement, and they've boycotted it for 2 years. Rishi Sunak has worked very hard to mitigate their concerns in the Windsor framework. It didn't go far enough for them. He now has, it appears, got another deal over the line that will bring them back into the power sharing government. So I think he will probably turn up in Northern Ireland at some point in the next few days to do a lap of honour and say, I am the man who actually got Brexit done, and not just for England, but for this part of the United Kingdom as well.
What about the optics of Sinn Féin being First Minister?
Yes, that's almost lost, I think, amid the drama within the DUP over last night's meeting, because we now are poised for another historic moment in Northern Ireland. Just 2 months after the power sharing administration collapsed here back in 2022, you'll remember there was an election in Northern Ireland, and Sinn Féin's Michelle O'Neill topped the polls. So for the very first time, Northern Ireland is poised to have a nationalist First Minister. If that doesn't tell you that there has been a change in the demographic, then nothing will. And remember, Sinn Féin has also been doing very well, at least until last weekend, where their poll numbers dropped a little in the Irish Republic, and there is potential for the party to lead a government there in due course as well. So you could see a Sinn Féin Taoiseach Prime Minister in the Republic and a Sinn Féin First Minister here in Northern Ireland in the not too distant future. But the DUP says its commitment to return to devolution here is dependent upon the government, the UK government, honouring its commitments. So we'll be looking to see what exactly does the government table at Westminster in terms of legislation over the next couple of days. But if all goes to plan, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Michelle O'Neill installed as First Minister of Northern Ireland as early as Saturday.
Sinn Féin in charge both sides of the border. What might that lead to? I suppose some may question. That's a conversation for another time. What time did you get to bed this morning?
about 4 o'clock this morning, and there wasn't very much sleep because you know what it's like. You're trying to analyse what has been said by the various party leaders, and it was a very dramatic evening because we didn't just have protests outside the meeting of the DUP party executive, but a very prominent loyalist activist who blogs a lot was live tweeting a commentary from a source inside the meeting, a very clear indication of the fact that there are challenges still ahead for the DUP leader, Jeffrey Donaldson, both inside and outside of his own party. But make no mistake about it, this is a huge achievement for both Jeffrey Donaldson and for Rishi Sunak. Everyone has said this is a circle that can't be squared, and they appear to have achieved the almost impossible.
Let's see what happens in the coming hours and days. David, thanks for getting up for us. Much appreciated. Looking at the weather for you now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
An improving picture today over many places as the sunshine spreads south and east, currently seeing lots of cloudy grey weather over many parts of England and Wales. Also a few spots of drizzle around as well, but across Scotland, Ireland and Northern Ireland, cold but sunny as we saw.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
The producer just said, must chat to the end, but actually what she said was must.
Must. But we must do both.
Yes, indeed. Tell me.
Talk about these brain implants. So this 64 very fine filaments, thinner than a human hair, that's been inserted into this person's brain. We don't know who this person is. And it's hoped that this could then lead to people with mobility problems start being able to manipulate the environment around them. They're hoping, first of all, with a computer mouse.
OK.
Yes, or indeed be able to control your phone or your computer, ultimately, to be able to communicate. They're calling it telepathy, which certainly implies that the big aim of this is to enable people to communicate who previously haven't been able to, locked-in syndrome, people without the use of their limbs and so on.
Yeah, sounds a bit voodoo, doesn't it? Let's see what happens. We are being told that the idea is that 80 people by 2026 will have had this implant. What does that actually mean? Will quite rightly said, actually, if it was 80,000, then we could be talking about it in more detail. He was right, of course. He's been a bit busy with his show. You'll see him in just a few moments' time. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye.